Mike Abbott, City Manager.
Steve Peterson, Assembly.
Bill Evans.
Edward Boston's on the line.
Forrest Dunbar.
Tim Steele, Assembly.
Dick Trey.
John Weddleton.
I'll be bringing that. I don't know what here. Courtney Peterson on beach.
Norm Morse, Mayor's Office.
Dennis LeBlanc, Anchorage Fire.
Jody Petrick, Anchorage Park.
Dave Swarner, Anchorage 5. Roy Carpenter, Anchorage Police Department.
Justin Dahl, APD. Sean Case, APD. Chris Tolley, APD.
Sherry Easley, Legislative.
Rose Foley, Assembly Vice Analyst.
Thank you. Mr. Wilbur, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with the Assembly today. We have a busy schedule. I sent out a calendar for today's events. We're scheduled from 10 o'clock until 3 o'clock. I expect that we will probably get done a little bit earlier. We have a couple breaks in there. So what I'd like to do is start off with, for today, I'm going to spend in the packet in front of you, you should have a packet of general government. There's a separate packet that we're going to hand out this afternoon that has the utilities. So it's pretty much the same format as the presentation. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking sort of highlights, general scale about what we're doing on the budget, the revenues, the personnel. I think Assembly members, when we did the high-level overview, had some questions about where personnel are being proposed to be reduced, and we have a table in here that will illustrate that for you. Our presentation lineup, we're going to start with Anchorage Police Department. We've got 45 minutes scheduled for them, and then followed with Anchorage Fire. We have another 45 minutes scheduled for them, and then I've asked the following directors to show up a little bit early so that we just make sure that we have enough time. And then we're going to take a short break around 12:30, and then we'll pick it up with 4 of the enterprise and utilities. ML&P will be with us next Friday, as well as the balance of the general government that that won't be with us today. Similar to the formats in the slides, what you'll see in here is for each individual department, those that have an operating budget and a capital budget, you'll see the first slide will be their operating budget. It will be a continuation. If they had anything in 2016 that was a one-time funding, we show that those one-time will be reduced. And then below on the bottom of the page, you'll see some information about their 2017 proposed and broken into either one-time or a continuation. So I'll give the sort of a quick overview of each department, and then I'll ask it'll be up to the Assembly members. If you have any questions from the directors or their staff, this is an opportunity to ask those individual questions. And if we're not able to answer them today, we'll certainly get back to you as soon as we possibly can. When we get to the road bonds, when PM&E, I've asked them to bring maps so that when we get to that, we'll have a list of the projects, but Jerry Hansen and his staff will bring color copies of the maps of all those projects, so you'll be able to take that with you when you leave. So this slide looks familiar. It's been edited slightly. This is basically where we are in 2016 to date. We have our expenditures at $497 million. Our proposed budget's at 502. Our current position count, 2,272. And then we made some adjustments. We noted that we weren't capturing some part-time, seasonal, and a couple of the SAP positions. In the original presentation, we had 2,309 total count. The number is 2,296, and so that's going to look a little bit different than the previous presentation. But the other numbers, our property tax base is recommended, as you'll see here, in 2016, it's at 266 million, and in 2017 proposed it's 271 million. This slide here and the following one, this is a copy of a slide that's in your budget book. When you go to the summary portion of the budget book, you'll be able to see where the funding sources are, and I'd like to just spend a little bit of time on each one of these, and maybe starting straight at fund balance. As you'll notice, the fund balance number here is 9.7. The number for fund balance that we're using from general government, that's the one that's been on topic. There are other little pots of money that have fund balance in them, 181, the convention center. There's a lot of other little places. So the 9.7 is a summation of that. But 8.9 of that 9.7 fund balance is really that fund balance conversation that we've been having. The rest of it, as is illustrated in your book, it's a combination a little bit of workman's comp and GL, some IT. That kind of makes up the balance of that. When we get into the property taxes, the number that you see on property taxes, that is inclusive of the 4.6 increase that we have. Under the taxes and other, those are taxes that are inside the cap, that 69, or that $69 million, that includes, those of you may be familiar, auto tax, tobacco, motor vehicle registration, use of MISA, and of the use of MISA, in that category, roughly 25 million of it is coming from the utilities. When you get over to payment of taxes, payment in lieu of taxes outside the limit, that's the room tax, marijuana, penalties and interest. Again, these are all described inside the book, but this is a total package of all of the revenues from all different sources that we're using to create a balanced budget.
Mr. Wilbur?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you mind if we ask questions during your presentation?
That would be fine, sure.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chaney?
Mr. Wilbur, didn't we start at $15 million in the fund balance?
So
You're saying we're starting at 9.7, so where'd the rest go?
Good question, Mr. Chaney. So
Thank you, Mr. Chaney.
this fund balance number is a combination of all of the 5 majors, plus there's a whole bunch of different revenue categories that also have fund balance. We included them all into this number. The conversation that we've been having since we built 2016, as we ended, we had a $15 million fund balance from the 5 majors. There was other fund balance in other little places, but that fund balance is the unrestricted fund balance, and that's what we've been using. So,
Hey, just one point of clarification. This is the amount of fund balance that's being used for the 2017 budget.
So that
It is
is
not the
still out
total that is available.
correct.
That number is, we expect 2016 to end with approximately 12 to 13 million of fund balance at this time, of which we're recommending 9.7 be used for the 2017 budget. So there would still be unrestricted fund balance, 2 to 4 million, depending on how the rest of the year finishes, that would still be available for future years.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Thank you for training. I have a follow-up question. So, Mr. Abbott, you said at the end of this year, there should be, the anticipation is 12 point whatever million dollars in fund balance, is it correct?
12 to 14 million. There's still a lot of variables in play.
Okay. So that's in addition to the fund balance from 2015?
No, that would be the total unrestricted fund balance at the end of 2016.
Okay. Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
So this illustrates sort of where the allocation of those, where our budget is similar to last year. About 56% of our budget is in personnel, about 13 million, or a little more than 2.5% in supplies, about 200,000, very small percent, less than 0.5% in travel. Other services includes all professional service contracts that we have, and we have about a little more than 11% in debt service, and a small increment in capital outlay, and a small increment in depreciation. Again, this is a graphic that's illustrated in your general government book in the overview section. I added this slide here. I know that there's been some that we've received some questions about how by department is the budget split up. Again, this is a similar table that we include in the budget. I'm not going to go through each individual department, but you can basically see that almost half of our budget is targeted towards public safety, which is important. We also have, and then beyond that, it's broken down into individual pieces. So as you're talking to departments and you have questions about how their budget is built and developed, you can see here. One thing to note on this slide is when you look at a department's budget on their page, if they have debt service or depreciation, it will show up on their page. In this slide, we pulled out debt service and depreciation. So just make note of that. If you're comparing this, if you just take the IT department and you see 19 million, they may have additional expenses in debt or depreciation, but each individual page will guide you.
Mr. Reynoldsman?
I just wanted, when I looked at the debt service different categories, so if you're a people mover and there's a bond to buy buses, that bond applies to their department then?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Debt
And
service.
police for computers and cars and so on costs. That's
Roads.
There was one for, this municipal manager or something like that has, there's some administrative one has debt service.
I don't know that one.
I'll email you that, it's just.
Okay.
Thank you,
It's
Mr.
entirely possible that either in emergency management or one of the other functions that's considered a part of the muni manager's department, that there is debt service associated with that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Please continue, Mr. Manager.
This is a reminder, this is a summary of all of the departments, and I know you'll get an opportunity to speak with them. The slides should look very familiar. These are the proposed reductions, both in personnel, services, supplies from all the departments. Again, fuel and fleet we pulled out separately, and each individual department will have their own little piece of fuel and fleet reductions where they have a fuel or fleet budget. This slide here, this is an illustration on the far right there by the departments, starting with the assembly, and these are in alphabetical order. And then what we have in the revised 2016 budget by full-time, part-time, and total, and then what is proposed. And then on the far right are some notes to note where the adjustments are, plus or minus for each individual department. Again, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but suffice it to say that under the part-time, if a department has a part-time or seasonal position, it would be recognized in that column. And so again, the bottom numbers, the position count for 2016 and the position count for 2017 are reflected on the bottom.
Mr. Middleton?
So backing up, sorry, 2017 total reductions, but the budget went up, so this
Correct.
is.
So while the personnel are going
Full
up,
picture.
yeah, the personnel
But is there-
are going up slightly, but we're also making some staff reductions and some staff increases.
Okay, but on this page, it just shows the implication here is, oh, the budget's cut 7.4 million, but that's not
Right.
the case. Is there another one that shows all the additions?
We're not
But the
following.
budget went up, though, right?
Yeah.
So it's not all cuts from last year.
Well, the budget's going up. I mean, the increase in, we encountered, again, if you remember the first slide, a significant portion of the increase, or a significant portion of our budget is related to personnel. So while the total number may be adjusted, we included salary increases and benefit increases that are prescribed in existing contracts, and for the execs and the non-reps, we assumed 1.5 in 2017. But Mr. Weddleton, I'd be glad to follow up with you.
Okay, I don't think I'm explaining, but that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Middleton. Mr. Training?
Yes, every organization, state, city, has all these positions that are not filled, they're gonna eliminate. I'm interested in a list that gives me by name, by department, whose job is being eliminated, real people. I don't care about the empty ones. I wanna see how it's affecting real people. So if you give me that, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Training. Mr. Willis, please continue.
So the last slide that I wanted to share as sort of a highlight, this is the capital budget for 2017, and again, departments will be able to address each individual request that they might have. So the total amount of bond, again, that's in the proposed CIB for general government is about $46.9 million. It's about $1 million less than last year. We have no state requests for general government. The federal dollars that you see here are primarily from Federal Highway Administration through matching program. We have some other, and then the total amount. I noticed that we do have a state request for the Port of Anchorage, and when we get to the Port of Anchorage this afternoon, we'll be able to talk about that further with Madam Chair. So it's very, very general. I know that in our previous work session, the Assembly was anxious to talk to and see department presentations. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to start with APD. I'm going to ask Chief Tolley and whoever he wants to join me. Again, this slide is in your budget book. The Chief there's a lot of movement in APD. So what you'll see on the top are 2016 are the one-time requirements that we added in 2016 that were removed. And then they do have debt service. Then they have proposed changes to the 2016 program salaries and benefits, increase in contribution to the retirement fund that's identified there. Then they have some one-time expenses. These are primarily related to the two academies and lateral academy that they are going to run in June and December. These are the total costs for running those academies. And then at the bottom are the labors associated with after those individuals graduate. We're assuming 28 graduates in this 2017 budget and all of the necessary requirements to support those individuals in growing APD. So I'll turn it over to the chief and or the assembly if you guys have particular questions about APD. And then or if you have anything else that you'd like to talk. And then again, we have a slide on capital. So Madam Chair, it's up to you.
Well, I don't see anybody asking to speak, so if the chief has something he'd like to share, that's fine.
Just really proud of where the department is today. We had hoped in 2 years to grow the department to 400 officers. We're actually going to accomplish that in our first year. We hope by the end of this year to exceed that 400 goal. And it is a different department than what it was a year ago. And we're very grateful that the Assembly is considering continuing that effort, as well as a very supportive administration and mayor that envisioned a much stronger department in making Anchorage a safe community.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you very much.
I don't see anybody.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to build on the chief. You got a little bit of capital program. So APD is requesting some bonds in their program here. Security out at their headquarters, making some improvements to their investigation room, as I mentioned earlier. That one there we may be able to accommodate separately from a bond. We're looking into that one. And then some improvements out at the training facility. But all required improvements to improve their services as well, Madam Chair. So if you have questions on each one of these.
I'm sorry, Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't see anything listed here. Aren't they building a new firing range? Is that going to be bonded for, or?
Yes, that's primarily funded with a state grant, and that contract is maybe in process right now. But yes, that work has begun and will continue, and the facility will be opened with the funding that we have available. There may be future requests for additional capability out there in the future, but that's not a 2017 request.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Trainee?
Chief, security for your police station. As you go into your office, if somebody came in there and saw an explosion would take out your office and anybody there, you guys looking at hardening that facility, the bond issue, because right now it's not that safe and secure of a building to you.
That's correct, Mr. Trainee. Security is something we've taken security as well as safety is something we took very seriously, and we've appointed a person to a position to oversee those projects and so on. APD was basically an open campus up until last year, and we've begun to make it a more secure campus by doing some reconfiguration of entries and exits, and then putting some additional fencing and also some jersey barricades to fortify the premises a bit better. We're also constantly evaluating how to make the inside, once you're inside the department, more secure. We've gone from key locks to cyber locks with individual combinations so that we know what time of day that people come and go through a door and who the individual is that's coming and going through the door. The additional fortification of making it for explosives and things like that is a concern, and we do not have it in the budget right now, but it's something we're continuously evaluating, and should funds become available, be something we've done.
Thank you. We usually look for 2018 bonds if you do that. I want to make sure that people just can't walk in and cause mayhem there.
Yes, sir. And part of that safety is actually in this capital improvement, and that's the restrooms on the 50 that you see there. At the present time, individuals that are maybe there for interviews and so on, potential suspects in cases, right now they would use restrooms that the staff would use. So this would create a facility, a much more secure environment. Also, if there's accidents and things like that within the restrooms and so on, it makes it more containable to bloodborne pathogens and other diseases and things like that that could potentially happen from accidents with individuals in those circumstances.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Mr. Abbott, getting back to the firing range, you're right, we've been going after state grants, state funding for years, and I think we've got a lane we need to make this thing happen now. And this will be a multi-use among all the law enforcement agencies that I know in the South Central will be coming there to use it, so.
That's correct. And we do have the funding, assuming there's no hiccups in the project, to complete what we're sort of calling the first phase of the work out there. The police department and others have ideas for how the facility could be expanded beyond that capability, but that's not an active request at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in general, with our proposed capital budget, it's the second year in a row that we're proposing to increase our debt load, despite our so-called policy of trying to keep it even or less. So I'm not inclined to support that. So I'm looking for areas in that proposed budget that maybe aren't as essential. So if you could just, Chief, of these 3 projects, would you say that all of these are absolutely essential this year, or are there any of them that you think could be delayed to another year? I just would like your opinion on that.
So they are also in order of priority to the department, and it was actually a list of about 8 or 9 items, and it was reduced to these high priority items, and we feel that each and every one of these things are essential.
I somehow have a feeling when I ask every department that I'm going to get the same answer, but I appreciate
It's
it.
tough.
If you
even
ask
getting
it
to this
that
point.
way, I can pretty much guarantee it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Weddleton?
I had a couple little ones actually going back to operating just for a minute. And one is a big savings, some savings from not taking non-represented positions in the public safety pay plan up by 1.5%. So we had made some adjustments because the non-reps were getting downgraded pay significant. We're not going to end up there again, are we? After 1 year.
This would be the beginning of that, but hopefully it would only occur in this year. And if we limit it to this year, then theoretically it would not happen.
Okay, and then the prisoner care agreement escalator, is that $1 million that we're paying extra over the?
Unfortunately, that is due to state cutbacks and demands. That's the additional burden that we're inheriting from the state, close to $1 million for our prisoner care.
They just up the bill.
Basically.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Deal?
Yeah, what's the net change in funding for the Girdwood contract with for police services?
So Girdwood has budgeted,
That's their taxes.
yes, $600 and I believe $30,000 in 2017 for police services.
Is that a year by year?
I believe they're anticipating executing a 3-year agreement. There are cancellation options available to both parties, but I believe it's a 3-year arrangement that is being negotiated right now.
Is there any need for increase, or will there be a increased police costs because the state troopers pulled out, not just Girdwood, but the other communities as well?
Well, it's a subject of some operational concern to both our dispatch operation and the police department. There is a portion of the municipality of Anchorage now that will not have police services as we currently think about that. And so it is an operational challenge, but we're not requesting additional funds for that at this time. We can't. We're not allowed to use police service area funds outside of the police service area, and Rainbow, Bird, Indian, Portage are outside of the Anchorage Police Service area.
If there's a problem in that particular area, they'll just send up the red flag and whoever's in the area will come.
Sure, if there's an emergency, if there's a life and death situation, I would expect APD, the troopers, Whittier, if they're available, everyone that can respond will respond. Once the emergency is resolved, at that point, there will likely be little or no service provided by any of those three entities.
Not exactly after.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Before I go to you, Mr. Dunbar, I'd like to follow up on a comment in terms of the Gerwood Police, and it's a 3-year contract, Mr. Abbott. And then you said for 2017 budget is $630,000. That's on an annual basis, though, correct?
Correct, it's subject to appropriation.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, Mr. Dunbar.
So I have a couple of questions from the binder itself. And I'm not sure, you guys don't have it in front of you, but perhaps Mike does or Lance does. So on page 7 of the police portion, there's something called the Prisoner Care Agreement Escalator. And I want to know, is that increased fee to the Anchorage Jail?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Well, why didn't we call it anyway?
The agreement that we've signed with the Department of Corrections is called the Prisoner Care Agreement.
Gotcha. So the escalator, it's almost $1 million. On page 17, when you're looking at the different positions, the full-time positions, there's this huge drop between 2015 and 2016. And I'm assuming that's some kind of reclassification of people. Could you describe what happened there? Page 17.
It is, through the chair, it is due to the way our budget system works. In 2015, we did have a reclassification due to CBA change, where we had to basically reassign all positions mid-year, and that created a double count of those positions. So there was no growth due to that. It was truly a adjustment in our system, and I apologize, I don't have a note. We'll make sure there's a note to that effect in our budget presentation.
Okay. And then just following up with Mr. Evans's question on, if you go to the next slide here on the capital budget, could you describe in a little more detail what you're going to do in terms of the functional remodel for the training center for $750,000?
So, Chair, sir, essentially what that's going to be, the training center was built in the mid-90s and hasn't had a significant change to it since then. We've had some upgrades to the indoor range over the years and some other things, but in the last year or two, we had a remodel to the roof. But what we're finding is that the current setup, as technology's evolved and just training methods have evolved, we need to do some remodeling of that to make it more functional for our use and for the other agencies that use it. So it would be a remodeling of the classrooms, and also some, for example, like replacing some of the flooring that's original, things like that. So just kind of an overall remodel of the building.
So this is something that's been ongoing for a number of years then?
As far as the remodel of the building?
The need for a remodel
Yeah,
of the
the
building?
need's been there for a while.
The need's been there for quite some time. And it's also important to remember that this is a facility not just for the police department, but for the police community. It is utilized by a lot of other law enforcement agencies, as well as the community itself. Last night we hosted the mapping session for the community, invited them inside the facility. And quite candidly, a lot of the carpet is worn all the way through, right down to the concrete.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that now?
Certainly, Mr. Gilbert.
So, just so for my own clarification, we're not talking about the gun range here. This is a different facility. And you're saying that it's used by a variety of agencies, not just the police. So I guess my question is, are those other agencies helping us pay for this? Especially if any of them, are there state agencies, are there federal agencies that use this, or is it just other municipal departments?
They are not. At this point, this is a muni-owned facility, and typically we do not charge other agencies for sort of routine use of the facility. Often it's in a shared training function with APD, and other Anchorage, municipality of Anchorage efforts, and other agencies are invited to participate.
Is this $750,000 broken out anywhere in our?
No, and at this point, we have not initiated the design effort for this project. So this is expected to be a total project cost. If the bond passed, if this were on the bond, and if it passed, we would then initiate a design project, which would lead to a construction project. So we have not, other than describing a need, and a order of magnitude for cost, we have not made specific decisions on what the changes in the facility functionality and the design to support that would be.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, it seems to me this is a tough year to do that, and you've got 3 classes going through, and scheduling a major model of the site, even minor model, it's going to take a little bit of planning.
It will. If we get a chance to start the design and sort of functional review of the facility this summer, assuming again that the funding comes through, it's likely that the actual construction would not take place until 2018.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Trainee?
Just for those who don't remember, this building started its life out as a Safeway store. We picked it up on the state grant. And had it started originally as a training center, they could have built into what they need. But now we're having to pick it up and modify it. But originally it was a Safeway store.
Thank you for that bit of history, Mr. Trainee.
Sorry, I missed it.
Mr. Wilk, please continue.
It's in my area, investment office.
Madam Chair, do you have any more questions for the chief or his staff?
I don't see any more. Mr. Bosky, do you have any questions? Okay. Please continue.
All right, thanks, Chief. So next up is the fire department. So if you just give a minute for Chief to walk and his staff to step up here.
Hey, LV, I'll just let you know if I have questions, okay? It's kind of hard for me to drive and talk.
Got you. Thank you, Mr. Bosky.
Watch out for moose, Amy.
I'm watching to stay on the road.
Only in Alaska do you have assembly members dodging moose, driving in the snow, listening to the budget presentation. All right, so for the fire department, in their proposed operating budget, again, we have similar one-time requirements. They had an academy in 2016, so they're funding for the academy. They have geo bonds and other changes in debt, salary adjustments, $30 million, an increase in contribution to police and fire retirement, and then the proposed budget. We illustrated the 800 in reduction of overtime, and then again the public safety plan, similar to police department. They have a position that is identified as an SAP position, and like this position, and you'll have many others that from departments that have a role in supporting SAP. The proposal is that that position would not be in the budget after July 1. And then fuel, some adjustments and increases in their trust. And then the fire department, I will point out that on the salaries and adjustments, we've been working with the fire department. That number is probably going to be adjusted when we propose an S version. It will be a little bit less. So we're recognizing that we're putting some refinements on that, and we will share that with you as well. I just wanted to make this summary there. The chief and his staff and our staff have been working that. So on the operating budget, and then on the capital budget, we need to go back and forth. They have proposal for an engine, two engine replacements, and then a proposal for a bond for an ambulance, two ambulances, and support staff that would accompany that. So, and again, I want to compliment the chief and his staff since 2016 and working with us in 2017. Done a good job with his department, and we've been working together and sort of challenging each other to come up with a good proposal and a plan, and I do appreciate that, Chief. So, Madam Chair, it's up to you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
So, this is a question that I think applies to almost all departments, and I think I know the answer, but I'd like to get it from Lance and Mike. The intergovernmental charges, and I'm just asking here because this is one of the first ones to have a major increase in the governmental. If you look on page page 6, there's a 21% increase in 20.1% increase in intergovernmental charges, almost $2 million. Could you describe, I'm assuming that's SAP related, but correct me if I'm wrong, because a lot of departments have these significant increases in intergovernmental charges, and I'd like to know why.
Yeah.
Through the chair, it is most likely due to SAP. We do have it specifically identified, but what does happen is due to the anticipated increase in IT in 2017, it is an internal service fund that does allocate out, and so yes, you will see the increase in all departments as you noted for the SAP costs, because that's how IT recovers its costs. The department, many of the allocations are due to use of service, and some of them are allocated based on personnel costs. And so the departments with a larger use of service or personnel costs, you will see have a larger increase in their allocations from IT.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Certainly, Mr. Billboard.
So I realize it's going to vary based on department, but can you tell me of this $2 million increase on page 6 again, what percentage of that is driven by SAP? And if there's a significant chunk of something else, can you tell me what that other thing is?
Not off the top of my head, but we definitely can provide that to you.
Okay. Can I ask one more question?
Certainly, Mr. Billboard.
So to sort of ape what Mr. Evans had asked earlier, if we go to the capital slide, what, practically speaking, is the effect on the fire department and on Anchorage if we only buy one fire engine, not two?
We actually proposed 3 replacements of engines 1, 5, and 14. At the request of the administration, we reduced that to 2. We have national standards from the fire service that we have to adhere to, or would strongly recommend to adhere to, which we do, which helped us achieve an ISO rating of 1. And our replacement plan is based upon hours on the meter, miles on the transmission, maintenance costs, coupled with the recommendation of at what certain age it moves off of frontline response and goes into our reserve fleet. So what we're proposing here, Mr. Dunbar, is to take 2 of our frontline engines that have timed out in years of service and not get rid of them, but move them into our reserve fleet and then purchase 2 new engines. But the original request was for 3. And we're hoping that by joining a national cooperative purchase contract, we put in here $900,000. That's typically if we go it alone, but there's tremendous advantages for downsizing the type of engines that we're buying right now, making them, quite frankly, more simple with less bells and whistles, and joining a national cooperative contract, and we could probably lower this number potentially $100,000 to $150,000 per copy. But both of these engines are needed. Right now, we have no reserve engines.
May I ask a follow-up to that?
Please, Mr. Billboard.
So, Mr. Abbott, I guess for you too, Chief, what's the timeline of joining that cooperative? And let's say we do get it on the bond and we do 1.8 million, and it turns out that it costs 1.6 million. So what's the plan for, what if we were to reduce the bond now in anticipation of that?
Well, the action that you're being asked to take on the 15th of November is not to adopt a bond proposal. So there'll be a separate assembly action that'll come to you either in December or January that will have the exact bond language that we recommend. If we do have better numbers by then, and we're hopeful that we will, then you'll see that reflected in these numbers. There is no desire on our part other than sort of a reasonable contingency amount on top of our estimated costs to overfund or overbond for something like equipment replacement.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Wellington?
And just for the same thing's true on the ambulance purchases as well. The MICUs, we are hopeful that we'll bring them in at less than the unit cost that's described there.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Mr.
Let
Wellington?
me, one follows up on that. So looking at this, so these are new ambulances in addition to the fleet then, or they retire?
These would be two new additions. Right now, we have temporarily staffed with the support of the International Association of Firefighters, 1264, 2 reserve ambulances that we put into service because we had Medic 2 in service in addition to Medic 1 downtown, but we had to provide overtime to staff that medic unit. As you recall earlier, we were burning out our paramedics, so we needed to do something fairly dramatically different. We staffed 2 temporary BLS units full-time. Tremendous success. The statistics bear that out. The morale of the employees bear that out. This proposal is to add 2 permanent new ambulances. So we'll go actually from 9 full-time permanent ambulances to 11.
Okay, so the next line is the staffing for.
That's a memo line. Right now, the fire department bonds for all of its major apparatus, the tenders, the trucks, the engines, and the MICUs, and we've been enjoying 67% approval rating from the public in order to do that. But we have another 30 to 50 light-duty and specialized pieces of equipment, snow machines, backcountry, front country rescue, 4x4s, plus all of the battalion chiefs, my car, the cars that the inspectors run. We have no plan whatsoever within the fire department to replace those units. This was just a memo item to alert the administration that externally to this particular process, we're going to have to come up with a replacement plan for our light-duty vehicles, or Battalion Chief Riggs will die in the street.
Okay, good. And then on the SAP, so these dollar amounts, this kicks in like go live date July-ish, so it's really half a year essentially, right?
For the depreciation.
Well, so the IGCs are to allocate that.
The IGCs will allocate all of the operating expenses associated with all of the IT systems. SAP is going to be the biggest of those, and depreciation is one of the elements of that operating budget.
Just to follow up, Joe's, you'll note that the 360 is under other, so that is not something we're proposing to be bonded for. That's just another capital improvement outlay, different from a bond.
The department will be looking for, and the administration, for other sources other than bonds for those light-duty vehicles that the fire department uses.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I'd like to follow up on the sources. So we have
Well, right now, we've been talking with Mike, and he's been supportive. We've had a very fortunate turn of events. Of course, last week we opened up brand new Station 3, the Max Schoenberg Fire Station 3, which is a state legislative grant from 2008. Tomorrow we have the grand opening of new Station 9, which was a grant in 2010, 1 o'clock, dedication service, please be there. But in building those replacement stations, we were able to sell old Station 9. We also had old Station 7-1 out on Jewel Lake, and we sold that earlier this year. Once those capital proceeds come in, net of any expenses and paying off the interfund loan that we used for new Stations 3 and new Stations 9, we're hoping there will be a significant amount of residual money that we can use with the administration's approval to set up a 5 to 7 year capital light-duty replacement plan and use those monies as the seed money to begin that program.
Makes sense. Thank you. Mr. Trainer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, you said we're ISO rated 1.
Yes, sir.
So if we don't go with these capital, if we don't do any of them, what's the damage? What would happen if we went ISO rating 2 to the people in Anchorage? Because it's your insurance.
Right.
What would-
Theoretically, there would be an increase in your homeowner's insurance rate. Practically, for the past 10 to 12 years, we have tried to work with the major insurers to understand better what that means to an individual homeowner. They're very, very reluctant to share any of that, other than to say that the ISO rating is one of 6 to 8 critical factors in the makeup of insurance rates. It wouldn't be an immediate impact, clearly, but over time, if we did not replace our major apparatus on a regular and recommended schedule, then we might be subject to change.
One other quick. Chief, a couple of years ago, we bought some new ambulances that were defective on purchase. They needed modified. Would you make sure whatever we get this time does not have to be sent into the shop as soon as before you even put them on the streets? They were that defective.
Yes, sir.
So I don't think you were here at the time, but I think you remember that.
Yes, sir, and we've actually put things in place already to address that. So the ambulances that we've purchased since then, we have not had that issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainer. You're welcome. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know the plan is to save $800,000 through reduced overtime, but you're planning to get 2 additional ambulances. So you may be able to reduce overtime, but you're going to have to staff those other new ambulances. So how do you end up with this savings?
So not shown here, and we have done this before, we did this with Medic 7, I think in 2011. If you add incrementally new apparatus, there was an allowance to add the labor to the property tax cap. And right now, we're proposing to add 14 additional firefighters. It's 6 for each, but with people being out on FEMLA or workers' comp or annual leave, you actually need 7 in order to maintain the 6, 2 each day for 3 shifts. So we're going to have a memo when we come to the bond discussion, as Mr. Abbott said. We'll propose to you a memo item that when the voters approve the capital purchase of the bonds, they also approve the 14 salaried positions to be added to the tax cap. This was last done, as I said, about 4 years ago.
It was 2005. We were around then, Dennis.
Brilliant idea.
Yeah, exactly. So if the assembly agreed to put it on the ballot, and if the voters approved it, we would be seeking an amendment to the fire department budget at first quarter. So that would be available to them. Until then, we will continue to operate Medic 81 and Medic 82 in the current fashion, which is under an agreement with the fire union, whereby we are reducing staffing in 5 engine companies, 4 engine companies?
Right now?
Yeah.
3. I'm sorry, what was the question?
I think we're reducing staffing in 5 engine companies right now. Instead of 4 firefighters per day on those rigs, we're at 3 firefighters per day on those rigs. And that allows us to staff Medic 81 and Medic 82 with no net increase in personnel or overtime. That agreement expires in April, so we need to work with the fire union to see if that can be extended until a ballot measure could pass and we could train the positions that would be authorized by that. So our hope is that we can operate in our current configuration throughout most of 2017. And then starting in 2018, we would go back to the plan to fully staff the engine companies and also fully staff the 2 additional ambulance units, 81 and 82. Did I say that? Did I get all that right?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, great, thank you.
You're welcome, Mr. Peterson.
Yeah, my question's along that same line. It seems to me we brought those reserve units up because of the increased need in the downtown area, SLAS-related activities. You're now saying that you're going to make those permanent as opposed to an emergency basis, which is what we had. We've seen over the past 5 years, depending on how you make the count, about a 25% increase in the number of our transports. So that while the spike outbreak of last summer was a triggering event, the pressure had really been building for the past 4 to 5 years. And we had our downtown medic unit, Medic 1, which was the only one at the time. The utilization for that unit was 35, 40%. And people were getting burned out. They work a 24-hour shift, and our greatest fear was some young firefighter driving that ambulance when they were too tired and they shouldn't be. So this is really
great balancing of the utilization across the 5 to 6 major activity centers so that it is evened out. Its time has come. There was a triggering event, but the pressure was there.
But now the demand level is appropriate to staff.
Yes.
And we'll still,
Well, Madam Chair, do you have any questions, any further questions for the chief or maybe Ms. Kowalski?
I don't see any.
Yeah, I do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so Chief, does this budget reflect any rig closures or rig deployments or rolling closures of any sort?
No, it does not. There are options to be considered, and we've been working, we're meeting almost bi-weekly now with the International Association of Firefighters. We'll be meeting again next week on a work opportunity discussion, if you will, on how best to achieve the $800,000 reduction number. But there is nothing that has been determined. It's just discussions. Clearly, rolling brownouts, closing fire stations would be the last and least desirable outcome, and we would come before you before we did that.
Okay. Is there any discussion of closing truck 11?
No, ma'am.
Okay, just always have to check. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Please continue, sir.
So, Madam Chair, we're a little ahead of schedule, and so if it would be okay with you, I have a couple of directors who have asked to jump in today rather than next week, and one of them would be the ER director. So I asked Ms. Turner, she's down here, she can speak. I included her slide at the very end of the presentation, so if it's okay with you, while we're waiting for management operations, I'll ask Ms. Turner to come in and just share with you. So she has a very short one, and then the other one we might be able to jump in, given our time, maybe use the fault. Both of those will have to go next week, so that's okay with you. I'll ask Karen to come up. So I'm going to jump to the very end here. So, Karen, do you want to do Bill's budget or would you rather do yours? Let's go to yours. If Bill doesn't show up, you can do his.
I'll give it a shot.
There you go. So thank you. So let's go ahead and do employee relations. They have, in their continuation budget, or their proposed budget, they have, similar to the fire department, they have a couple positions that are recognized inside the current budget as those that are working on SAP. They also have some other adjustments that they're seeking. So no real significant changes other than the changes in the PCNs for SAP after go live as proposed. So if you have any questions of Mr. Turner, Madam Chair, it's all up to you.
I don't see any. Mr. Dunbar?
I guess just really quickly, and this is not even directly related to your department, I think in some ways, but on page 20 of the binder that you gave out, the discussion here about savings from our employees opting out of their health care coverage. And I know we touched on that before. Do you see that, Mr. Wilbur?
Yes.
I guess I'd just like maybe Mr. Abbott, you're better suited to give us just like a little bit discussion about why it is that our employees opting out leads to savings when in theory our health care coverage should balance, right? I mean, no, it doesn't, but in theory it should. And also kind of, could you recapitulate sort of what you're doing to encourage people to opt out if it does indeed lead to savings?
Sure. There,
20. Am I looking at the right, maybe employee relations, page 20, ER 20.
Yeah. So we do have an opt-out option in the plans, and we do have a process that can share the benefits of that. Typically we are better off when our risk profile declines, as fewer people would be part of the process. So if folks don't need the coverage, there's no great benefit to the muni making a 20-something thousand a year contribution
Right.
on their behalf into the program. So it's either going to be a situation where roughly, say, 22,000 a year right now is a typical employer contribution right now. So we can pay 22,000 into the plan, or we can pay $350 a month, right? So $4,000 to the employee. That's the benefit to the muni for that. Otherwise, if we don't give the employee anything,
Yeah.
then they'll stay in the plan, and we'll pay a lot of money in. Those folks might be lower utilizers of the plan. They might not. There's no guarantee that they are. They might be, but we're better off making the lower contribution amount, if you will, at this point. I mean, it wouldn't make sense to pay them $22,000.
Right.
At that point, we'll take the risk and have them in the plan.
Yeah.
But for $4,000, it seems like we found a good bargain, both for the employee and the employer.
Do we know what the break-even point is?
It-
So could we increase the 7,000, get a bunch more people out? You know what I'm saying?
That's one of the challenges with the small pool that we have right now, is that there's so much variability in our plans claims experience from year to year that it's very difficult to know. If we're having a good year, we could have paid those people, $1,000 a month instead of $350 a month, and we'd be fine. If we're having a bad year, we shouldn't have paid them a dime, and we should have kept them in the plan to the greatest extent possible, because the plan needed the revenue. So it's one of the challenges with running. I mean, it seems like a pretty good sized plan, in terms of raw numbers, but as an actuarial sort of an experience, it is not. As you've seen, when you see the annual fluctuations in our per employee expense.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm looking on page 5. It's got a request for proposal for the FMLA program. I'm not familiar with that program. What is FMLA stand for?
Federal medical leave act.
Family medical leave.
Okay. All right.
Anything else?
It's just hard to memorize them all.
Anything
So
else?
we take advantage of consultants to help us manage that program. It is a very legally and very process-bound decision-making process in terms of what is allowable and what is not, how to work with employees. Our CBAs can get layered into that. There's a variety. Our medical plan can get layered into that. So we require consulting resources to help us navigate that, rather than trying to hire that expertise in-house exclusively.
Better to outsource.
Some. We have leave specialists that work on FMLA every day, and they will continue to do that. But there are situations where we need extra horsepower, and that's where the consultant can help us out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Please continue, Mr. Lewis.
You have no other questions for Ms. Turner? Okay. So we've asked Mr. Falsey if he could join us. And so I think at your last slide in your slide deck is the municipal attorney. So thank you. So you're going to do the rhythm. I'm on the end of it. So similar to many of the departments, what you'll see here is the municipal attorney has 2016 in their revised budget. We accommodate their salaries and benefit adjustments as it relates to their current staffing. And then we had some one-time reductions in the rental rate, I mentioned that earlier. And then Mr. Falsey, similar to Mr. Abbott and Mr. Harris and Mr. Schutte, when we asked those departments to take, we had a target of about $5 million in reductions. We asked those departments to each look into proposals to submit as part of this proposed budget. For Mr. Falsey, his recommendation to meet that gap small reduction in professional services. Questions about each one of those? Mr. Falsey, before you arrived, Mr. Trainee asked for a list of actual names and personnel of individuals, so we're going to provide him that list in this position. There could be no one in it, but, so, anyway, if you have any questions of Mr. Falsey, some of the members, or?
Doesn't look like it. Thank you, Mr. Walton.
Thanks for coming down, sir. I have a whole spiel, but I'm happy to get out
Do you
here.
want to talk? Yeah, please.
It's up to the assembly. I can give you my spiel, or I can let you get your business.
You know what?
See you later, Bill.
You know what? Frankly, we have the time. I want to hear what you have to say.
All right, well, I'll give you the
Thank
short
you.
version of this spiel. So you see in our assembly budget that we are $7.5 million down to $7.3 million, representing about 1.5% of the whole municipal budget. And this might be what's sharing, if only so you can see some of the exercise that we have been going through in the budget season. I will confess that I have spent more time with people's office than I ever expected to spend while in my position. And we have really gone through and looked at all the way we're spending our money, from staplers to cell phones to toner cartridges. And what we are proposing is taking this hit in our legal secretary position and the miscellaneous reductions. I'll say that there is a sense that by not filling the vacant position, we are not feeling a lot of pain. That is actually not the case, and I want to make sure the Assembly is aware of that. In our situation, the civil attorneys section for a very long time had 6 legal secretaries. We were most recently at 5. Our 5th just moved over to take another job, and we were on the cusp of hiring for that position. And as we saw the budget story coming together, we realized that was the only way to prevent ourselves from actually lay somebody off if we put that on ice. But that means we are going to be at the skinniest staff support that we have probably been in decades in the 7th floor. I think we can make that work, but it has encouraged us to be creative. We've actually reached out to UAA's paralegal program. I think we're going to try to set up an internship program for the UAA paralegals to kind of give us some additional back support. And we are thinking very creatively about where to pinch pennies. The municipal attorney's budget, and I'll give you this as one last detail, is $7.5 million, but it doesn't actually allow you to create a lot of wiggle room when you actually open the hood and look at the mechanics. So of the $7.5 million, about 1.2 just comes off the top as not within our control whatsoever. It is the contract we have with the Denali Law Group to provide indigent defense services. That's up for, I think there's another extension on that, and then we put it out for proposals in a few years. About $6 million of it is just labor costs, which leaves about a couple $100,000. Actually, the real figure is, if you add the indigent defense contract, we have about 1.7 million. You take 1.2 off for Denali Law Group, and almost everything that remains is locked down with some kind of contract. We have Westlaw charges, we have prosecution of just square charges, courier services, court fees, time matters, bar dues. And when you're down to really discretionary spending on an annual basis, it's less than $200,000, and that's copiers, cell phone, Dean's interpreter, books, broken furniture, that kind of thing. So we are really trying to be pretty creative. The municipal attorney's budget at 1.3 is now back to 2011 levels, and actually less than it was in 2008. And if you just broke out the labor costs, we have been totally flat on labor costs since 2010. We're almost at the same levels we were in 2007. So that was our short spiel.
And I'm really glad we decided to hear from you because it generated some questions. So thank you.
This is what Abbott says. He says, we got the vote, stop talking. So,
I'm
just saying. Thinking that Chairman Halsey has been out of the audit group, now got an officer in Anchorage, because when they got the contractor from the valley.
My understanding is yes, but I actually don't know that personally. I can look into that.
I just want to know if that's affecting, want to make sure they've got an officer in now. We could probably give them a lot of business from what I've seen in the cost. How long has this legal secretary been vacant?
Only since the summer, and we had already solicited, we'd advertised the position. We had a number of actually very good applicants when we were on the cusp of setting up in-person interviews. I called all the applicants on the phone and had the pleasure to go put it on ice.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Weddleton?
So, who's in charge of collecting fines and things like that? You guys write an asking letter and collect, or?
We do. The answer is it depends on the fine. So if
this is an APD citation, and we're not charged with collecting them, although if it's uncollected, then you can either have a court action in which you can collect it through the court system, or it gets referred to Treasury and they can garnish PFPs. There's a lot of different ways of doing it.
So I guess, can you be self-funding, or, I mean, if you cut back, are we going to then collect less revenue somehow?
I don't think that is the case. We generate some amount of fees from our in-town program and our pretrial diversions program, but I don't know that our cutting back has a negative impact on the overall budget. Unless to the extent that if we cut even further into the bone, there may be a scenario where we have to do more outside counsel arrangements, and those are much more expensive than we are able to handle matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Also, Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It seemed, I didn't notice it at first, but $118,453 for a legal secretary, even fully loaded, seems like an enormous amount of money. I mean, for someone who hires legal secretaries, I mean, that seems to be above norm. I mean, are we paying, I mean, I would think that if that's 118 fully loaded, you're talking about 85, 90,000 annual salary?
Probably 70.
No, it was in the mid-60s, at which the prior incumbent was our legal secretary 3, which is the highest position, and had been there almost 20 years. And I think she was at the 67-ish range. So that was the number I was told fully loaded when we offered up that position. We were hoping to get away with hiring at less than that.
As I just to, this might be useful, $22,000 a year of that is health care.
That's what, yeah.
And we pay 22% to PERS. So if you take a $60,000 salary, just for those two items, not including payroll taxes and the other stuff, you're almost at 100,000. So anyway, it gets there fast.
And I should have said in my presentation that the budget, of course, does depend on the recent news. I understand the South Anchorage Assembly member is not running again. I can only assume he's going to offer up a significant pro bono service to the
I think that's enough.
Plenty of time for that.
Anything else,
Mr. Evans, you take a big announcement on our town running again.
It seems that way, yeah.
Anything else, Mr. Evans?
No, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
You know, we're trying to fill a seat on the Transportation Commission.
I've asked the maintenance and operations people to be here a half an hour early, which will lead them to be here in about 5 minutes. So if you could just take a brief recess and wait till they arrive, that would be nice. Thank you.
Okay.
Just came back over.
I just so feel about it.
Yes, ma'am.
I dropped my car off yesterday to get tires changed, because I thought, I'm gonna beat the rush. They didn't get it done, they didn't finish, and they called me like, oh, we're not gonna get it done until tomorrow. So I went home, 10 minutes before they closed, they're like, oh, your car's done. And I'm like, well, I can't do that. I did this morning, and of course,
You're right.
I mean, my dad was came to pick me up at, I said, well, it's 8, and I can be back in the England by 10. And of course, then it's just, I was just gonna say, so, maintenance and
My daughter got her tires on just the opportune time.
It was a question because I dropped it off before I went to work and had 3, and they told me I was going to be 6. And then when I went to drop it off, the girl was like,
I did want to ask, Mike, I did want to ask you a question on the record what would you got rid of the prosecutor's office? So we also get rid of $1.2 million indigent defense contract.
But then I thought, well, it'll be okay, and then it snowed.
Well,
So then I was like,
but
well, this is
physical crimes, aren't they, they're also low-level state misdemeanors.
Not all.
So we have other crimes. The state is.
They do. But, you know, that doesn't mean that, like what we did with Slice.
True, but I mean, every other, we are one of, what,
I
3
saw
places in the
probably
state that
about
have a school of
10 or 11.
Outbound
Fairbanks. I don't think they did.
All over. I mean,
Even broke, sure.
and then,
But anyway,
I don't think the city does like that. I think that's sort of behind themselves on just arresting for state conduct. So, that is an option. It
River.
would change the dynamic.
And then you get into Anchorage Mission Creek. So on the other side outbound, there is
Fractional
two
nature
cars
there,
there.
not about
We're going out to the valley.
And we're talking,
That is a policy
On the
choice
Palmer
that,
side, as I
not this
coming
year,
across the
but
bridge, it
for
looked
the
like a
future,
trooper
it-
vehicle was actually in an accident.
but it's
And
open,
right
it's only
there.
$1 few million.
Cheryl's saying there was.
Well, the
vehicle on
prosecutor has a
fire.
dozen, or, I don't remember the slide, about how many people they have, but, it must be more than that. Yeah, right. So, there's probably $400 million.
And then another $1.2 million sort of contract now.
I was including that, but, no, that's the order of magnitude we're talking
And they
about.
diverted all the
So,
traffic.
and Bill could give you a list, Seneca's got it,
And to go
you
around
know,
an accident.
how much of what we do, the
And I watched
state
the how many
would
got hit.
have to do,
There's
we
always
didn't
kids
do
that
it.
But, I mean, what we're actually saying is, that
People
And the
still
news
know
alerts,
that.
the news alerts that I got, that outbound Glen's closed, you have average right, so
Yeah.
it was right there, they were
Although,
like, so
you know,
luckily,
we
like,
should-
where they
we
can
should pass
around
around
the
in
roundabout,
Fairfax, for
Says
instance.
that it's
get around it,
illegal
but-
to have
They do.
rear-wheel drive
My
vehicle.
dad's
Yeah.
driving,
They
you
don't.
know.
They don't.
It's one of these things where
Makes a lot of the problems there.
Because I'm driving in this morning, I gave myself a left over plenty of time, I had to shovel 4 inches of snow out of my
That's a
truck.
lot.
understand how we
They
can.
don't like the situation.
So I thought, 25 minutes ought to be enough, I'll probably get down there in about 15 to 18 minutes. And I picked the perfect time, I'm driving down the bar about a block before I get to Costco. And the rear-wheel drive vehicle that's in front of me, just all of a sudden goes sideways. And so I stopped, the guy stopped, everybody stopped, but then by the time the cars all got around that were in the right lane, and we were able to switch over, 2 or 3 minutes went by.
Yeah, no.
So,
They are hazards. I don't know how anybody driving. I haven't put my winter tires on it yet, but I have all-wheel drive.
I actually had this vehicle, it'll be 5 years in December, and, it's an all-wheel drive, and I haven't bought.
I drove down,
have
that's her.
all season time.
I'm not that nice.
And so I've been running those the whole time, and I don't really have much trouble in the winter. You know, and, I don't go and drive up on hillside like I used to, so in those days I used to have studs all the time. And I found out that if I had a front wheel drive vehicle with the studs on the front, I really didn't need studs on the back. You know?
Get the traction in front, it's pulling along, yeah.
It was just,
And I remember
we had, I
driving up
had been
to
out
the
there
people's
for a
driveways,
little while.
and they would look out, and,
kind of a weird
as I'm delivering something, and they're going,
Surprised.
"You drove that up here?"
So much.
I'm going, "Yeah, I get everywhere with that little thing." You know?
Yeah, some of those little cars, as long as they're either front wheel or all-wheel drive, do really well.
Yeah, I had a Chevy Citation with a V6 front wheel drive, and I put studs on the front.
Hey, thanks for letting me do that. It's like driving like this. But it's like when I have it on mute, so you don't hear the road noise. That's why it takes me like a minute, but I was like I was around the S curve, so I was afraid to take my hand off the
Oh,
wheel.
no, and I'm glad you didn't, you know?
Oh,
Had it on
How
music,
is it out there
so we couldn't
now?
hear the screams.
it's not bad if you don't drive like an idiot.
Right.
So how far up on
Which
the
there's
side?
few of those out there.
I know.
Just above
But,
Hillside
but
Drive,
it's
you go up all the way
really,
in the alley,
as long as you go
go
slow.
right on Hillside Drive.
I mean, I didn't have any problem.
In town, it was long.
But I have my brand new,
Not too far
yeah,
up.
well, I got my tires changed at Mr. Luke out in the valley.
Far enough up though that it's good to have studs.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a long drive in.
Yeah.
They were supposed to have my truck done yesterday and they just didn't get it done. And so it wasn't convenient. It was
They ought to be
done,
working
but
24 hours a day.
Yeah, we used to
this time of
make
year.
I had to
runs
drive all the way out there this
real
morning
regularly
and
up to
all the way back
the fire
in.
station.
And I was gonna stop and drop off the
Yeah.
tires at
Because
home, but I didn't.
they were probably got
I
the
just don't like to do
staff,
that.
Yeah.
2 or 3 guys.
These busy, low staffing is.
So
I should have set tires.
rather
on
than
my
drive
car,
down the hill and
but
pick
I have
something up or
four-wheel
whatever,
drive.
it's just.
It helps, but if you start
And then,
sliding.
we
I was
actually
gonna say
started
four-wheel
out,
drives helps you go.
we were from
not your fault.
Upland Fire Station, which was basically just across the street from where we were, because we were on the corner of Upland and Seward. And so as guys got transferred to other stations from that station,
Yeah, no, good place.
we're getting calls from all over town. Eventually, even,
And then,
when the fire department had their union
car that I
meetings,
have,
They call.
they would call and then it was usually 6 or 8 or 10.
so I usually do it about a week or 2 weeks.
What's the ETA?
Yesterday, it was perfect.
But a day like today, when
I don't know,
we
Madam
got the
Chair.
very
They were
first
supposed
snow,
to be
they
asked
canceled
to-
school.
My daughter left
As soon as you started answering the phones at 11 a.m.
Reduce their budget by 50%.
We get fined.
Minimum
Well,
3
that's the
hours.
rules were played by Mike and I already.
She got 'em
have
all.
slides, but we can
I
roll
got a
it.
great deal, I got news.
She got them all.
Oh, wait, it's,
I got a news,
No,
I got a
because
whole
nobody,
set of tires.
we weren't expecting to get enough snow, we were going to cancel school. which is great. And so people wouldn't have been prepared for that.
American tire.
And so they'd be scrambling, oh, here, where is it? And so I'd be on the phone trying to find out who might be available to come in.
Oh, really? Honestly, that marijuana cultivation is less dangerous than a mechanic shop.
We're gonna miss you.
Well,
Well,
we ought to.
it'll be fun, you hope.
Well, I've been rotating all of our cars through.
This is
the
great
road
ad.
trucks
And I
that
actually just had something
Same
positive
on
to
Tuesday.
Entire lot.
You can roll there
Now,
Tuesday.
the American Tire had marijuana.
Who was it, yeah?
So we
No.
got that.
It's a guy who used
You know,
to
and
be
then
president
my car
of
was
community
next,
council.
and then
His name is
we have
Kevin
another one at our
Smith.
car shop right now. So it's been.
And then he was gone for, I think he moved out to the river for a year or two.
See, that was
And then he moved back into town, and he got back on the board, Northeast Community Council board this year. I really wasn't totally surprised that
I've got
he was
somewhere
running
where-
because he took on some of the most thankless committee jobs. The one organizing the multi
Kennedy, when she went off to
annual
college,
picnic,
it's funny
which is a
because-
real,
Yeah, it would be a thankless job, yeah.
and then he was the chair of the CIP
So
committee.
we're looking at that like, okay, well, the
And then
law
now
says
he's trying to
you can't
start
have one until
a,
September 15th, but
you
she
know,
was going up there the
month or
last week of
two
August, so.
community
rather
patrol.
than making her store her tires
Was he
and
like
we just
Democrat or
put them on.
Republican?
I'm not
Oh,
sure.
I'm
not sure
pretty
how much
certain.
enforcement they really do.
Well, we figured, I mean, the kids are just coming back right before the deadline where you can get them on. And so we
Better
figured-
safe
We
than sorry.
figured, well, that's perfect. Just wanna do that. So,
I'm surprised you didn't your daughter.
There could be
I'm not bad.
maybe one or two people get in there.
If I had a second girl,
Tough one to
it was
hold.
gonna be Reagan.
Historically,
I was gonna have
anyway.
it
You
Reagan.
get a lot more turnover in your summer seat, so it's always a challenge.
This particular seat that I have, no one has served more than one term.
My daughter just
I
said.
believe it was 2001, the last time someone was re-elected. This particular seat.
Because even it's such a diverse, kind of balanced district, you know, they can swing either way. It's a hard one.
I just this guy.
This is, you know,
So we can get into that whole debate.
services
I have
are not
an
going to be as good as
texting me right
people that
now.
are used to. Rise in crime, taxes are going to go up.
Easy to blame the incumbent.
Probably not going to make any income.
Is that the salt and pepper one?
We're not gonna
I
argue.
like the ones
No,
that
no,
are
I'm
already
not. I'm talking
shot
about just the
already.
classified issue.
You can keep those for the budget.
There's a lot of stuff classified that is not secure.
It's okay.
Oh, I like the
I
cracker.
was actually hoping we were going to have another winter this winter like last winter. That would have been a good winter to
Chili lime.
outdoor campaigning because it wasn't all cold and
Yeah.
snow.
I think it's good for the.
This was starting out like a real winter.
I think it's more of a Hispanic
Yeah.
chili lime on lots of things.
It's too early to tell.
So we're talking
A lot
about.
of different shops.
Chance this might go away, you know.
Doesn't matter who you are. Everybody should have-
According to the weather channel, our highs are going to
Salt and
be,
pepper ones are pretty good.
none of them are going to be over freezing in the next 5 days, so
Okay.
I think this could be here to stay. Now, if you get a half inch,
Yeah, we got about 4 inches, and it was pretty wet though, so it'll melt fairly quick. I would think.
Yes. Assembly was held.
Hey, life is good.
You're not protecting us. Who's out there
Okay,
writing
let's
tickets?
adjourn the work session.
So, Madam Chair, in speaking with Mr. Abbott, to give Mr. Chakowski a sense to sit down for a minute, if we could, we have Mr. Abbott's, we have the manager's budget here, so let's go ahead and do his. And then Mike can lead by example.
He's got a budget.
Mike does have a budget.
I thought he got whatever was left.
Slide 24, 27 is towards the back. And so it should be slide 24 or 27. The last slide before the question slide. And then we'll go back to maintenance and operations.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Madam Chair.
So my budget is essentially sort of the Department of Miscellaneous. The 20 positions that are accounted for in the manager's department include myself and Joy McGlocky, you all know upstairs. And then there are 4 functional teams that report into our department. Risk management, the Office of Equal Opportunity, Transportation Inspection, and Emergency Management. And that's where those other 18 people live, are in those functional areas. So Connie Ernst at Risk Management, Heather McAlpine, Eric Musser at TI, and Kevin Spillers at Emergency Management lead teams of 2 to 6 people, 2 to 7 people, excuse me, in each of those different functional areas. All of their funding is incorporated in the $13 million that's associated with this program. So there are no significant changes to our program this year. As you can see, as described in Lance's slide, no functional changes. We're incorporating the anticipated changes in personnel expense, and that's about it.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
So, I believe it's risk management, but on page 4 of the binder, there's, from 2015 to 2016, there was a huge reduction in contractual and other services. And I'm just curious what that was.
Sure. That's just a shift. The contracts that are associated with the Denina Center, the Sullivan Arena, Ben Boke, Dempsey, et cetera, the management contracts for those facilities were in, under the previous administration, those were in the manager's office. And Debbie upstairs that managed those was also a member of the manager's office team. When Mayor Berkowitz took over, that function shifted to the Office of Economic and Community Development, and Debbie and her money, the $10 million, whatever it is, now goes into Chris's budget. So that's where you will see that on next Friday when you see Chris's budget. So that was not, I'd love to take credit for having cut the budget by that much, but that is not the case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Trainee?
Your 2 part-time slots, where are they located at?
Sorry again?
Your 2 part-time slots, Mr. Abbott, where are they located at?
One is in risk management, and the other is in emergency, or excuse me, is in transportation inspection.
That's what I wanted to know. So we've got how many TI now? We've got Eric and a part-timer.
Eric has 2 inspectors, one of which is part-time, and a clerical. So TI is 4 staff.
Is the cost, we put on the industry covering the cost of the personnel?
They do. Yeah, they take in, I don't know, $10,000 maybe more than what they spend. Maybe not even that much.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Evans?
Just, thank you, Madam Chair. The Chief Innovation Officer, Mr. Babb, is that a part-time position?
No, that was the amount of money that was in the budget for him. He was only funded for about half of a year, a little more than half of a year last year, because he started mid-year.
Okay.
So that's the amount of money that my budget had in it. That is shifted to OFB.
Chris.
To OECD, and you'll see he'll have added 83,000 plus
The full year.
the rest of the money necessary for a full year.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I don't see anybody else. Please continue.
Okay, thanks, right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if we could go ahead and get back to maintenance and operations. And Alan, I can ask you to step right here. So we have slides 15 and slide 16. And this is the maintenance and operations operating budget. Similar to police, there are several one-time additions in the 2016 budget. In this case, in police's case, it was academies, and M&O case is related to O&M for improvements. So you'll see it was reduced in 2016 as a one-time, but then we're adding it again as a one-time in 2017. So Alan's got some adjustments, pluses and minuses. He does have geo bond debt. A significant portion of the outside roads is in maintenance and operations and salary adjustments, and then some reductions in labor. And then proposals, again, similar to, I mentioned to Mr. Falsey, as I mentioned to Mr. Abbott, when we were looking for reductions, we asked Mr. Abbott to find a percentage of $5 million under those departments in his leadership. So one of those is maintenance and operations. So as a result of that, we have some proposed reductions in labor as it relates to snow removal. And those were highlighted in our presentation on the 30th. And then on their capital side, they have a proposal, recommended proposal for a lot of roof replacements for buildings that are approaching 30 years old, or safety or lighting improvements all across the city, and then some asbestos and removal and sprinkler upgrades up at Government Hill, and then additional street lighting improvements. So I think that's the highlights of maintenance and operations. So if you have any questions, maybe we can start the operations and then lead to Kathy.
Right, Mr. Trainee?
Thank you. Snow removal. So we're proposing going from what we're currently doing to 84 hours?
Yeah, that would be the outside, we've never done this before, so we anticipate the worst case scenario would be that. We think that we can do it in roughly 80 to 82 hours. That includes sidewalks, everything.
How much would it cost to maintain snow removal where we're doing it now?
You have to add in all those numbers.
What does numbers work out to be?
We'll be glad to follow that up, yeah.
Because in a Arctic city, cutting back on snow removal or delaying it is not going to be a fun time, and I want to know the numbers, money-wise.
Okay, we can provide that.
And you're doing a great job, by the way. You're not going on vacation with the next snowfall here. You're banned from going on vacation.
Not for 3 weeks.
Enjoy your time off. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, so on page 8 of the binder, there is a $600,000 reduction in supplies. I'm just wondering, what is allowing you to do that? What kind of supplies are we talking about?
That's fuel.
Oh, yeah.
I was assuming it was fuel, but I don't know, maybe we don't need to buy as much wrap or something.
No, as Lance noted when he did the overview, we've reduced the total muni budget across all the departments significantly because previous year's budgets were based on higher fuel prices than what we actually expect for 2017. So it hits different departments at different amounts, obviously, because not every department burns as much gas. Alan's department burns about as much as anybody. So we have reduced his budget by several $100,000 for fuel alone. You saw similar reductions in fire. When Abul gets here, you're going to see a really big number for public transportation as well.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And at the bottom of page 16 here in today's projector, it's talking about LED upgrades, $750,000. Is this something we're going to be doing every year, or until we get them all switched out? Or
Yes, I believe this 750 gets us real close to the end of the upgrades.
is that right?
Yes.
Of course, but just to remind you, M&O does not own every streetlight in Anchorage. So, in fact, the majority of streetlights are owned by others. They're either owned by utility companies, homeowners associations, state of Alaska, all own. We have a patchwork of ownership patterns. It is both confusing and inefficient, both, not just one or the other, and it is a challenge. But Alan and his team do manage, I don't know, a couple thousand streetlights.
16,000.
16,000. And those will be transitioned as a result of the funding from previous years and this year.
And just to follow up on that, Madam Chair, so I mean, is the ML&P, are those streetlights separate than this, or are these?
Yes.
Yes.
And I was wrong when I said there's 16,000 in town. We own roughly 1/3. So
About 5,000.
9,000.
All right, great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Houston. Mr. Steele?
Yes, Berry Street roof replacement, seems to me we've been talking about that for years. Didn't we have that in the budget previously, and that's a leased space?
No, that's the one we purchased last year.
I got it.
And it was always in as a state grant application, never funded.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Trainer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. LED lights, are we gonna get those with sensors on them so we can control when they go on, when they go off? They'll tell you when they're effective, or we just blind the vanilla ones, don't have the sensors on,
We are buying them with the capability.
but we're not buying the sensors.
We're not buying the sensors because you have to buy the whole infrastructure with it. But we're buying them so they can be equipped at any time.
So what's the cost of getting the sensors for them?
I'll have to get back with you on that. I don't have that information.
Yeah.
If you'd let us know, I'd appreciate it.
The plan going forward, you heard ML&P talk about it, was to test the system with ML&P. They're working on upgrading their fleet of streetlights, and they have several thousand. And they will install the sensor technology and the control technology initially. If it meets our expectations and it works as described by the vendors, and of course that's not always the case, so which is why we're not buying that capability initially with the streetlights that are operated by M&O. But they do have, what the terminology is, they are 7-pin fixtures. So as opposed to a 3-pin or a 5-pin. I have no idea what those things mean, except to know that 7-pin can be fitted with the sensor technology and sensor and control technology if we want. And we're hopeful that what ML&P is doing is going to work like gangbusters. If it does, we'll retrofit the stuff that Alan's putting in, and that will have the same capability. But it will not when it's first done. All we will get initially is the big energy savings associated with basic, for want of a better term, dumb lights that only use a quarter to a third of the electricity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure we have the capability of putting sensors on them if that's required it's done. Because I just won't have to buy new LED lights again. Didn't get the right ones this time.
You're echoing the mayor's expectations.
And the nice part is the 7-pin costs us no more money.
What?
The 7-pin light costs us no more money, so that's a big plus for us.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Trainer. Mr. Willis?
Backing up one here. A couple things. One is it looks like when you're doing adjustments, 2016, you took out, you didn't pitch in 20,000 that Girdwood wanted for a cemetery, and that does not get added in for 2017.
So I
And
think
understand they want that.
I start that. In 2016, the numbers evidently appear to be the same because they asked for $20,000 for sort of a recon study analysis to find it. I was just aware that last week they want to add another $20,000 to start the design. So this is one-time money for a particular purpose. I was aware last week that they may want to ask for $20,000 for something else.
Coincidentally, 20,000, but different goal. Okay.
Yeah, they had the 20,000. I don't know if they spent it or not, but that was in their budget for 2016. One of the challenges, and we get this with all the service areas, Lance and his team build their budget in August and September. In many cases, the service areas, they're not thinking about their budget until October or November. And they have much simpler budgets. That's not necessarily unreasonable. But it frequently means that we do not fully capture their requests in what we propose to you on the 1st of October. So if, and we'll be working with GBSA to confirm that, but we would have no problem with a budget amendment or an S version including additional resources for Girdwood, assuming their tax support, that they have the tax support to pay for it.
Mr. Milton?
one?
Okay, the bigger one, I just, you removed a one-time voter-approved bond O&M and it was 340,000 in 16, and then it is in 17. What is all that back?
That's a roof reserve.
Yeah.
That is a roof reserve for when we originally put on the roofs at the, let's see if I get the three right, it's the museum, the library, I believe Sullivan Arena, and the assembly.
Very good.
I had to go back deep. The assembly, at that time, put out an ordinance that we would reserve replacement money for those roofs, and that's what that annual increment is over, I think, 30 years or 25 years, is to put that money aside in a reserve account, and that's what that's for.
So we will tax for that, assuming the budget is adopted. And then we will put that money into a capital reserve account and then use it only for those three facilities. And in fact, earlier this year, we used most of the reserve that had been established for the library on the new library roof as a part of the as a part of the remodel project that's underway right now. And then we are accruing. We've got, I don't know, probably close to $2 million available for Sullivan and the museum that they will need over time.
So, but in 2016, you did not put some in, is that what this says here?
No, we did.
You did.
And then it comes out, and then it goes back in. This is admittedly, one of the potentially confusing elements of our budget. These O&M increments are considered one-time increments, but they do come back. So yes, we are recommending that for 2017.
Thank you.
Lance's fault.
Go ahead.
May I, through the chair, may I, for this particular O&M, the reason why we do take it out, put it back in, is because it is a limited time frame that the O&M is allowed to be increase the tax cap, and so that's why we do take this and one other O&M component in and out of the budget. But other O&M just remains in, and we don't take this in and out. We do this in and out stuff.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens?
What about roof replacement? Didn't we just do a roof replacement on this building, or did we? Yeah.
This building?
This building.
City Hall?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
We don't own this building.
I know we don't. But
We would
it seems
not.
to me we have a rather large maintenance obligation in the contract.
The lease agreement clearly delineates what are the responsibilities of the building owner versus the tenant.
Yeah.
And yes, we do pay for many of the improvements that are made or maintenance work that goes on in the building is our responsibility, and there's a budget established for that, I think in the real estate services program, which you'll hear about next Friday.
The health department building.
We should get a new one.
That'd be a good place for City Hall, or one good place for public owned.
Yeah. At this point, and we briefed the assembly on this several months ago, we had proposals on the street to essentially trade the existing Health and Human Services building and a couple of other parcels adjacent to it to someone who would provide similar space, new or more functional space, somewhere else in Anchorage or the health department. We're currently in negotiations with two of the proposers on that, and we'd be glad to give the Assembly an update on the status of that at a later date. But we are making progress towards a project that would have us give up the current health building site at 9th and L and gain new or remodeled space elsewhere in town.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Steele, Mr. Dunbar?
I'm fine, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And on the slide that we had up previously, it's showing a reduction in fleet rental rates. We actually rent some of these trucks or equipment or whatever instead of buying it. I wasn't aware.
We rent them from ourselves.
We rent them from ourselves.
Right. We have a separate account set up in the city government that owns, if you will, the many of the fleet assets of the city, especially the big elements of this particular fleet are the street maintenance equipment and the police fleet. There's also other elements of the general government fleet, but and this is a enterprise fund that we've established. We pay into it every year. The fleet then, that fund then both pays to maintain the equipment and hires the employees that are our fleet maintenance employees that work at either Bering Street or Fairbanks Street, and then also pays for the fleet replacement program as we replace equipment. This year, we talked a little bit about this in an earlier work session, and we're more than happy to brief the Assembly in greater detail. That fund has built up a little bit of a surplus, and our proposal is to use some of that surplus this year and then reduce the rental rate that individual departments pay for their equipment in 2017. That is a one-time issue, and none of us should expect that to be the case again in 2018 unless something radically changes.
Okay.
Cars get really cheap or
Well,
something.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz, and Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is still the lease we've got on this. It's a triple net lease left over from the Works administration. And nobody in their right mind would negotiate the kind of lease we got on this. For example, the heating system, when it died, we had to pay for it. They didn't have to. He can tell you a lot of other things.
I can, and I don't want to, a triple net lease can be challenging, especially for an older building, and this one's an older building. I will say this, our all-in per square foot lease rate here is about $1.20, I think, for this building. That's not a bad price for downtown Class B, B plus office space. So we take a lot of the risk related to the building, which is somewhat uncomfortable for us, and we don't necessarily get the value of that because we don't own it. So as Mr. Trainee said, if we make a big investment, we don't get the benefit of it because we're not building equity in the building. But as a pure lease, compared to other commercial leases in downtown, it's not a bad price. It is just, we've been here so long that, it probably would have made sense a long time ago to have purchased. But those are difficult decisions to make in the moment.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Mr. Trainee. I don't see anybody else, but a couple of comments and questions. But that triple net lease also includes us paying the property tax too on this building.
Property taxes, utilities, and maintenance are kind of typically what people are talking about when they talk about triple. There's double net, single net, and some of those factors are excluded, but ours is triple. I think that's as many as there are. I don't think there's quadruples or quintuples.
Okay, thank you. And I have a question. So the bond debt reduction, is that because of lower than anticipated interest rates? Or?
That's probably a question we'll need finance to answer. Or Marilyn, do you know?
To the chair, it is based on the public finance schedules for debt payment, and I do believe it is a result of their refinancing last year.
Oh, the refinancing.
Yeah,
So
it's just according to their debt schedules.
Right.
And so
that makes sense.
in
And that's a
line
good
with
thing. Thank you. So I don't see any other questions, so please continue. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. So next up, we should have public transportation. So Drew, if you want to join us at the table here, and whoever you'd like to bring with you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so next up is public transportation. For public transportation for 2017, the proposal is similar to, I mentioned before, the street maintenance when we various departments under Mike's leadership. He was charged with finding proposed reductions for transit. What they have is a proposal to reduce the service on 7 holidays. And then there's an associated, as it relates to those reduced direct costs, there's also a reduction in the fuel budget. I think Mr. Abbott mentioned that as it relates to streets. And then on their capital program, similar to years past, they have a proposal for about $750,000 in bonds. Those bonds are used to match federal dollars that are programmatic dollars. They're anticipated to receive every single year. And so if you have particular questions about the improvements or the service of Rule and Jesse, and help you address those questions. So Madam Chair, the floor is yours.
Mr. Weddleton?
So we just had a big show about different changes in routes and so on. Is that factored in here?
The proposed change in the routing structure, that is expected. The proposals that we entertained were zero net change in budget. So all of those options that were considered were roughly similarly expensive.
Because I think some of that was you shouldn't work on these holidays. You know, fewer routes, maybe fewer miles, but more frequency and include holidays. Is the recommendation.
Absolutely.
So we're just kind of using this for now, but you'll squeeze all that into.
Yeah, we're not crazy about reducing holidays. Right now, under both our union contracts as well as our operational paradigm, they're the most expensive service that we provide. We don't get a lot of utilization on them, but it's not zero. And part of the reason we don't get a lot of utilization is because the service isn't that great. So it's one of those, chicken or egg sort of a deal. So there will be people that will be impacted by this. It's not a great answer, but we have a budget challenge, and this is the least impactful reduction that we could propose.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I'm concerned that it's the people who can least afford it that have to suffer during this period of time. And I know it's a savings, and I know it's not economical to run them when they have 1 or 2 people on them, if that. But I just hate to reduce that service to the public. I'm just conflicted.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. I don't see any other questions.
Madam Chair, you guys are on a roll.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for showing up early. I
Thank you.
appreciate it very much.
You guys get all dressed up on Friday and everything.
So I think,
I thought that was the
did I see Maury come in?
Oh, we did.
I think.
All right. So next on the docket is Public Works Administration.
Thanksgiving, you would think that was really what you did.
Black Friday, Black Friday, all that. That's a good point.
I was just gonna say, since they're gonna close some day at Thanksgiving, Black Friday, that's the busiest week of the year. Well, people are up there.
They must have stats on how usage.
Sorry, it was my fault. I was bugging him about equal report stuff in the hallway.
Right.
That's why.
So, under Public Works Administration, operating,
Change the content.
Maury has pretty minor changes here. He has one staff change moving from one department to another. It's basically from PME, that additional increase in staff of the position in PME and do the assignments, the position will be reduced from PME and added to the Public Works Administration. Again, in Maury's in Public Works Administration, they do have a fleet, so they need reduced rates in the fleet and associated costs with those are reflected in his budget. So I think Maury is, if you have questions about service areas in Public Works Administration, really is in charge of those as Mr. Mansky was taking advantage of prior to this. So Madam Chair, floor is yours. Thank you.
I don't see any questions. Mr. Bosky?
Madam Chair, I appreciate the recognition. I actually cornered him in the hallway to ask him a subversive specific question, not related to next year's budget, but this year's budget. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. I don't see any other requests to ask questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, just for your benefit, Madam Chair, Mr. Starr did send me a request to get some information about the Eagle River Streetlight Service area. He wanted to get information about their,
Yeah,
yeah.
just send it to Lance, and
Yeah.
Lance will get it to us.
We'll have that request, we'll send it.
Thank you very much.
So,
Thank you.
So, don't believe Stephanie is here, and then PME will be right behind them. So, again, Madam Chair, we are so far ahead of schedule. I apologize that those folks aren't here. I asked you half hours or so. I don't have anybody else to fill it in.
What we'll do is take a break,
Okay.
and then folks can have lunch.
That would be great.
Okay, so let's take a break until the next department director arrives.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Yes.
Wait, I'm sorry, why did they increase the staff so long?
Is your building, really? No, thank you, because I'll take it.
Yeah.
Whatever, what's the project area?
Okay, what housing? I don't know. Chris Shute, he's not here today. But he just sent me an email with sort of the particulars. I'll be glad to. Yeah, he'll be here next week.
Yeah, we're starting to pay a lot more.
No, and I think, and Quick Inlet is doing a lot of work in that
Well,
area.
so I guess our break is gonna be really short, because Stephanie's
Do you want to lunch now?
Okay.
I mean, everybody can.
All of these
It's
going
been our run
to
up
really fast. Are they planning on
this year's
asking their
budget.
afternoon?
No, it was bonded for.
It's hard to say at this point.
So it doesn't.
Yeah,
Fully funded.
all of them.
Yep, we're gonna make it next summer.
But I guess the way they have their schedule,
Well,
they
it's
so fast.
only happening because you and
Yeah.
Ernie
And they have,
really
I
hustled.
have
Well,
to
you know,
here, but I know later this year.
I know, but it's
So
gonna
the
happen.
afternoons, people are coming on.
And,
Everybody, we're asking
believe me,
everybody to show up.
if you're,
So I'm thinking
if you're not around, and you're not, I know you and Ernie are gonna
So,
be there
I mean,
helping us cut the
I'm
ribbon.
calling them all now.
Perfect.
And so,
I just might miss Merrill Field, but I'm
Yeah.
fine with that. I went on tour yesterday. I went to their number.
Glad you got your fancy roads out there.
Well, it's been worse. At least I'd rather have snow than really rain. It really didn't bother me. It's just traffic.
It's just that when they talk about moving the
We have a 17-hour plow. Where? Well, we have all private contractors. And they do a good job. You guys have some private contractors up on the hillside too, right?
Oh, tons, yeah.
Yeah.
That's how, those are the roads that get best, yeah.
So McKenna does all of Shediac and Eagle River and Cedar Street, all of it.
Mm-hmm.
17 hours.
Oh, yeah.
The entire area.
That makes sense. You just break these things down into smaller bits. They can get
And
down.
sometimes we'll see them go through 2 and 3 times. I mean, in that time period. I mean, they are so fast.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I look in the car, but I don't think I really need it, to be honest.
But I don't know how, if they actually request.
Travis, what are you gonna do when you get off the, you just gonna go to work, make money?
Well, yeah. Continue with my normal full-time job. Just doing a lot better.
I'm surprised you were able to really do that. You were able to take a break.
I was able to kind of hold it together for 3 years, I think 6 years.
strange that it seems a little bit. Well, based on the
Yeah.
Well, I recognize that. But I want to, there's a lot of types of things she can work on.
I do too.
Exactly. And I talked to a lot of you guys, so.
You already go?
I went.
Okay.
There was no
I'm
conversation.
here, yeah, I went really early, but I was like sitting here thinking, I'm like, I'm gonna be out, like, I was planning on coming early just to figure out everything to get here.
I got your seniors already in the chair. So they were actually ahead, so I actually went ahead of the meeting. So.
But I had
I should probably say something.
I'm sure you are.
I wonder if I have his cell, I might have his cell for.
I'm not trying to defend their position.
I don't know.
I think I do.
Because if you stay,
Well, more than that.
I know.
I would recommend.
Ira is
Stay at the high school as an alternative.
Yeah.
And then he's slower in his service.
2 or 3 key people from each of those organizations.
Totally agree.
So you as lead, and me and a couple of our people. So, and, so I'm thinking 8 or 9 people.
I don't know who you don't want, I don't think. The other
I don't
one is
know.
that.
For that person to figure out when this
What's his
sort of right time.
If you will help me figure out who should be.
And he's just a pain in the ass, he works hard, but he's dogged.
If you'll send me a note, and doesn't be today, because we're not going to get to it for a couple of weeks.
Well, that's not, that's not
Butler.
Oh, no, sorry, I think stick around. No, I'm thinking, right.
I think his better
November,
half.
December.
Like, not answering his number, so maybe he's not.
We have
That's what it's
already.
set up
Yeah,
now.
that's nobody really works on who if you will help organize that
Presentation.
I will.
I don't.
I will, and we can host it, one of the open spaces.
He has actually been more of a leader on that than I have.
Okay.
Got it.
So,
He wants us to, he wants
Or
us
said it's your fault.
No, he wants us to help broker a meeting between the admin and the people up in Basher regarding the road board, regarding the road, trying to negotiate it.
It was grueling.
It was grueling.
In the next few weeks. A smaller meeting before the community
It
council,
seems like it was longer than.
or maybe after.
I know, you are, all of a sudden, I was planning on getting here.
That's coming up.
You guys are really just like, yeah, you're going to great lengths to get that mayonnaise out there.
I know.
My wife told me
Yeah.
to tell you
This is worse than
Yeah.
military.
to lay off the dumpster.
Dumpster?
Even when my dad
What
was
dumpster?
15 years
By the, where the forensic nursing is on,
Oh,
this big dumpster, she said.
Yeah, big dumpster. I went and raised it with them once, like 2.5 months ago. They told me they're moving the whole center, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, eventually, who knows,
Yeah. No, but I mean.
Yeah, she was fine about it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Or move the, well, I mean, the reason I did is because a sex assault victim came to me and said, like, I felt like shit.
Because I had to go next to the
Entrance to the
dumpster.
dumpster.
Thursday of November, so.
There's another entrance. There's a non-dumpster-based entrance.
After the November election.
Is that where your wife works?
Last time they'd be there when he went.
Or is she a nurse, or what's her?
Just an administrator.
I think what we need is here.
Well, I was told by them that they were looking for a whole new site.
Yeah.
They are.
Probably just keep them out.
Yeah, they have been for about a year.
Okay, work session.
Hopefully it moves soon.
Hopefully there won't be a dumpster.
Yeah, we'll keep going.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So let's start with the traffic department. Traffic has some adjustments in there, so we're looking at slides 20 and 21. So in the proposed 2017 budget for traffic, not a lot of significant changes here. Mostly, as I mentioned, there are reductions. They have some adjustments in salaries and benefits. They do have a fleet, so their fleet rate adjustments will go down. They do have some previous bonds. Most of the reductions that are proposed in traffic are related to supplies and some professional services. A little bit of reduction in overtime, but no changes in personnel. So, and then in the capital side, they have 3 projects an ongoing, this one looks very familiar to the assembly members, an ongoing signal system and safety improvements with projects all over town, school zone safety and the continuation of traffic calming program. So if you have any questions of Ms. Morello, then let's go ahead and start with operating, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Trainee?
Hello, ma'am. Opticon for the new fire station 3. How soon can we get it implemented? Because when the alarm goes off and the fire truck's got to go out, I don't want them to have to wait to get a break in traffic. I've got multiple reports of near accidents happening there just since Saturday. So what do we need to do to make it happen? And what's it going to cost to have it happen?
That's a very good question. I know that there was power ran out to the edge of the property line. Opticon is already in use on both the signals adjacent to it. So when they actually pull up and they have line of sight, and line of sight may not happen until they turn their wheel to the adjacent signals. So what was considered and what we'll have to do further research on at two other fire stations. Fire Station 4 that is on Tudor between McInnes and the highway has a push button that they activate that will actually start triggering the signals adjacent to them prior to them pulling out of the station. And then Fire Station, the one on 35th and McRae, the one that's at 35th and McRae actually has a push button as well to activate Fire Station 5. Thank you. So it's a question for my signals crew as to whether or not timing ability of doing that. I know there's power out there. I don't know that there's conduit to actually connect it to the adjacent signals and how those original ones were done though. So it's not, I guess it's not a simple answer.
The short answer, Madam Chairman, is that this subject is under active consideration. When the site was selected, this was a known concern, and the site was selected anyway. The traffic department and others raised this issue during the site selection process, but we went forward, and so we are where we are. But it is a known challenge. The traffic department and the fire department are working it actively right now.
In the meantime, we do have a point tilt zoom camera out there and are working with the fire department to actually identify when they're primarily having issues. Taking a right hasn't appeared to be an issue when they're taking a left, obviously, out of the, and so we're working with them. It's ongoing.
Thank you. If you get a response back to us as soon as you can, because I'm getting multiple calls from people who live in that area. And the firemen are contacting me. I need to give them an answer that we're moving forward or we're not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Whittleton?
I'd say a lot of my emails are, we need speed bumps. So is this traffic calming, is this more kind of those bigger projects where you do both outs and stuff like that? Or how much of this is speed bumps?
Traffic calming? The money, it's split between money that we contribute to overall larger projects, and actually usually if we're doing a larger capital project, traffic calming measures that we have identified as needs we incorporate into those projects and actually don't use any of this bond funding. So these tend to be for standalone projects that are going to either be speed humps, individual intersection improvements that we do, and sometimes corridor improvements that we may be able to do kind of piece projects. So we have some existing grants that we're using, and then the rest is bond to be able to do that.
So are you doing more speed bumps now than previous years? I'm just more aware of it now that I haven't.
In recent past, yes. We have. We actually had a number go in the Northeast Community Council, and we have a couple planned for Turnagain and also some in the Abbott area to exhaust the remainder of the grant funds that we had on those. And then we're moving towards identifying some of the more high priority projects where we can do improvements using some of the grant funds, the bond funds that we have.
Okay.
One of the challenges of the traffic calming program, Stephanie's traffic department operating budget is funded as an area-wide service. So she provides services throughout the municipality, Connect River to Portage, for signal maintenance, traffic signage, road striping, all those sorts of functions like that. The traffic calming program is funded with a capital grant that is funded out of the ARDSA program. There is no area-wide traffic calming money. So the only places we can spend that ARDSA money, the traffic calming increment you see there would be on the road bond. That's only limited to ARDSA. Now, it doesn't mean that LRSAs or other service areas can't pay for speed bumps, and assuming that it's compliant with Stephanie's program, that they can't be installed. But this money would only work inside ARDSA. Otherwise, and as I said, there are mechanisms, it would have to be funded separately outside of ARDSA.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Anything else, Mr. Mount? Thank you, Mr. Abbott.
Yeah, the speed humps on McRae during the upgrade there are well accepted, I think, by the community, and we're thankful that they have it. And you mentioned Turnigan. Is that section that's scheduled to be upgraded between Spenard and into the neighborhood?
Those actually, that section of Turnigan already has several existing speed humps on it.
But we're going to redo the street.
Yes, we're going to redo the street. I'm pretty sure those speed humps will still go back in, and there's other traffic calming measures as far as choking intersections to shorten crossing distances and things that will happen as part of that project. The specific money that I'm talking about, the grant for the Turnigan area, there are a couple other streets that are higher priority. We worked with the Turnigan Community Council for them to identify short segments of street that we could put in a couple of speed humps with. We had either $25,000 or $40,000 left in that grant, and we're going to exhaust the rest of the grant using those funds.
I get, just for information purposes, I get calls all the time for 25th Avenue between Spenard Road and each direction on 25th. People coming out of Chillicothe Charlie's at night, speeding down 25th to Spenard to get out of the neighborhood at a pretty high rate, and it may be an enforcement issue rather than speeding. But and then 25th on the other side in the morning commute, when the flashing light comes on at Romig, backs the traffic way up, and people take a shortcut between Minnesota to Spenard and then go down the hill and come in, and they bypass all that backed up traffic down by Westchester.
One of the reasons why the school zone at Romig is probably not, if you're the municipal traffic engineer, was probably not a good idea. It's there and it's not going away, but that is one of the consequences.
It's a light for walking traffic for folks to get into the neighborhood. I think it's really why it's there, to get people out of Roanoke or into Roanoke. Anyway.
And so are you talking about, when you say 25th, 26th is actually where the signal is? So
Actually, that is the 26th. I'm sorry, I misspoke on that.
Just 26th
It's
has
25th on the other, down by Chillicothe Charlie's.
Because 26th at the signal, where the signal is, there actually are several speed humps along that corridor actually that we had done.
I did get a call on 25th because that's the last place before you go down the hill.
Yes.
That you can cut across, and so that was the complaint I got on that. I haven't had it for a few months, but I used to get it all the time. Just one nice month.
And that one may already be on our list, and we may have studied it already. So at the end of the season, just so everybody knows, once we finalize all of the calming studies, speed studies, everything we do at the end of the summer, we put together a list that we distributed to all of you and the constituents that had requests to let them know what the results were, whether or not we have identified speeding problems in those streets that didn't have speeding problems, and then those that do, and then how they rank. Because we do have rankings, so that should be coming out.
I hate speed bumps, but as a driver, but when you live on the street and you've got fast traffic across in front of your house, it's dangerous.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Forrest and I actually had a question at the Northeast Community Council last night to wonder if there were any of the traffic calming funds that were gotten by Senator Wielkowski and I back in the days when the state legislature actually had a surplus. And we wondered if you might have already used all those funds, or are you back?
Actually, after after this summer's construction and when we finalize striping, the striping for some of the speed humps next season, all of those funds will be exhausted as far as the grants go for both. There was two different funding sources. We had one that was the Northeast Community Council that was a grant, and then we had District 19, both of which were similar areas.
Right.
But both of those funding sources will actually be exhausted as far as grants go after this season.
And just an additional follow-up, if I may. And I want to thank you for a couple of the signs that flash your speed as you go by. I don't know what the official title for those are, but there's one of those on Beaver, and the traffic on that street was extremely over what the speed limit listed is there. And then you actually installed one on East DeBar earlier this week, actually, and I've already seen people slowing down. So those definitely work. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky.
Actually, Stephanie answered my question. I was wanting to see when the results of the common studies were, because we do have streets in Eagle River that I know were included.
Yes.
I remember a few years ago, Bill and I actually made sure there was money in there for that. So we'll deal with Subversa, after we see the results. But we definitely have the same issues in Eagle River.
Thank you, Mr. Training.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephanie, could you let the community council know also?
Yes.
Because it's coming by community council.
Oh, yes. The list, the CC list on that letter is extensive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Training. I don't see any other questions, Mr. Silver. So, thank you. Thank you. You're welcome.
So next on our list is project management engineering. We're going to spend most of our time talking about capital. So I know that they're on their way, so if you could wait a moment, that would be fine.
How about 5 minutes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next year, we're going to block out an hour and a half. We're going to get along with that.
You never know.
The chief?
We're doing good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Laura, your floor is not beautiful. Anna's pretty much a stalwart of the river. She really is. She's well liked, definitely moderate.
Those signs, we actually purchased 4 of those signs using the funds from the grants. And they are dedicated to the North. They were, identified them, we put stickers on the back of them. So really, we're putting them in the key locations where we think they're appropriate, to monitor their effectiveness, to consider putting in permanent ones, permanent ones over here.
What's
the temporary ones are only $2,000. Honestly, they less than the batteries, but they are lasting at least 2 weeks as far as the batteries go. And they all use the same batteries.
Yeah, I mean, that's not my favorite thing, but I don't want to.
Hey, creatures batteries, and that's a lot of money.
There are some.
So that's why we did temporary ones to test.
One of the major
I'll have to confirm with my staff because they were working with the council to figure out what protocol is. I know it's too long. Section of boundary between, boundary from Muldoon east, got speed humps, but Muldoon west, where the hills and the right of way, that is going to be nearly impossible. So sign information for that area as well. I can confirm, but we do not want to get
unnecessarily. Right.
These presentations
I want to give them a chance to stand by.
I'm going to try to get all of my time cards finalized for the increase.
Enjoy asking.
Not gone yet.
Good, thanks for being here. Yeah.
Yeah, I called this down like 10 minutes. It's not
Bill, if you've got a lot of questions on this, not this, but all the capital projects. If you want to get the bonds below retiring.
That's where the money is, yeah.
So I mean, like what, I mean, I'll ask you if you want to, but like, if there are 2 million for flooding mitigation and drainage, what if that's 1 million? Like, what's the actual practical effect of it?
Yeah. We'll ask them.
But you know what, I like conceptually disagree with you that in a time when the state is in budget crisis and is not giving us capital projects, we should is borrowing a little bit more. And then when they are giving us capital projects, we should shrink it back.
That's a theory.
And so,
Keynesian, but it's a theory.
yeah, Keynesian, the basis of classical economics for the last 100 years. Yes.
Right. It assumes that there will be a
Yes.
period of more money coming from the state at some point in the near future. I was I would just point you to the fact that debt service is the 3rd largest component in our budget. Our debt service number for the entire budget is the 3rd largest piece, behind police and fire. So, I mean, it's the flip side of saying, well, yeah, we'll just increase debt when the state's cutting back. It's like, there's a practical limit to, and a downside to that, because as you increase that debt service amount, as our constraints keep up, that's just money that's going to come from somewhere.
During, I mean, I don't know if it was, I guess it was the case, but like, during, when we have more money coming in, we should have been aggressively paying down the debt service. And we did pay service, right? I mean, and that could be sold incentive service.
Yeah, it went down between the muni and the school district. But it's still pretty high. It's $1 billion.
What's that?
It's like $1 billion.
You mean the total debt?
Yeah. Anymore. Billion's the old 100 million. But I think we're on the same page, though, that at least eliminate the ones that can, or delay the ones that aren't urgent.
Well, this is why I was hoping you'd be asking more of these questions, but like the LED thing, what would have been 750 right now, but at 250 over the next 3 years. That kind of thing.
All right, Paul. Paul, this work session back to order. Please.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Next up, or the last one for general government for today, will be project management engineering. They have an operating budget, but most of the conversations in the past will be related to the capital, which is the road bond. So on the operating, on slide 22, there's a small adjustments for salaries and benefits. You'll notice they have a reduction of 1 person. That is the person that is gained by Public Works Administration we discussed earlier. Jerry's crew has a fleet, so the rental rates in their fleet are down. And they have some adjustments in personnel costs related to ABES grant funding, and then some adjustments in their fuel. On the capital, I know that we've asked.
Mr. Wilbur, can we back up a minute? I just want to make sure everybody knows what APPS means.
That's a good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur.
Jerry, what's the
I'll ask
APPS?
pollution distribution elimination.
But I knew what it meant, but maybe everybody else. Well,
Used to be called
somebody didn't.
It used to be called NPDES when it was a federally administered permit. Now the state's taken it over, so now it's APDES.
Thank you. Please continue.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. And then the next is a copy of their capital budget. This is in your capital book, your CIP. This is a snapshot of the proposed road bonds. I apologize for the small font. I'm trying to get it all in one slide again. And available in the capital improvement budget. So if we want to start with operating, Maury's passing out a copy of a map for the bonds that are listed in this. And this map includes not only TME's projects, but those that are available for parks and for transit. Gary Jones was very gracious enough to provide that map for me when I presented the capital budget to planning and zoning on Monday night, which they approved, and we're looking for a resolution to the assembly. So, Madam Chair, if we get back to the operating budget, if you have any questions on changes that Mr. Hanson and his staff are proposing, start with that.
Mr. Weddleton?
You said this capital improvement program went to P&Z and they said, okay.
Yeah. So on the capital improvement budget, they are required by code to review and make a recommendation to the administration and the assembly, and they met Monday night, I think at 17th, and I gave a presentation to them. Mr. Jones was there present, and they had some questions, and they're formulating a resolution that you'll receive. I believe they're going to meet on the 7th, so I'll ask Chair Gray Jackson if that formal resolution could be provided to you then. They didn't have any recommended changes in projects. They had some questions about the list of alley projects that were going to be done, where they were going to be done, and some opportunities and how we might be able to work with them a little bit earlier. And we, myself, PM&E, and the planning department agreed to figure out a different process for them, and they had some questions about how projects were linked to land use plan. So, but we're generally supportive, looking forward to having these projects done. And we also gave them a summary of all of the projects in 2016 that were completed. It was something that planning and zoning asked for last year, and they were very appreciative of that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, is this design and construction money?
A blend of it, yes.
A blend of it. The Chester Creek flooding, is that at Arctic? Is that the theories? Do something with that flow through at Arctic? Or is it something along the neighborhood?
That's something, it's all the way from the lagoon up to A Street.
Okay.
So it's the lower section of Chester Creek.
To eliminate the flooding, basically.
Yes, as you know, the creek has silted in quite a bit because it essentially serves as the outfall for most of our storm drains in Midtown. And its carrying capacity has been severely limited, and so we're going to be investigating the options for improving that.
Okay. The argument is a bridge or an upgraded culvert at Arctic, and the current system doesn't work very well.
And we will examine whether that culvert or other culverts are necessary. This grant would probably not have enough money in it to pay for a project of that scale, but it'll let us investigate it and potentially do some of the smaller scale work that would need to be done.
Yeah, I hope we do something, because we look at it and we say yeah, and then it floods again and nothing is done. The Turlington Boulevard upgrade, 35th to Spinard. That's one we talked about. That's a good upgrade. Is it going to happen next year?
Yes.
That's what the neighborhood was told. So.
It'll be built in 2017 if the road bond passes.
I got you.
Almost every individual project that's listed here, if it's identified by project name, will be constructed if it's construction money that we're asking for, will be constructed in 2017.
Awesome.
Mr. Dunbar?
I'm sorry, Jerry, something to say?
I was just going to say, the money in the bond for Chester Creek is to advance the design. We have some money in there.
I know, we just keep putting it, sliding it back. And, I hope we don't have a bad year this year and those houses along there flooded.
Thank you, Mr. Manson. Mr. Dunbar?
So people probably want to chime in on this as well. So Pete and I have met with the mayor about this. We communicate with you, Jerry, about it. But I want to sort of get this out there for my colleagues, sort of a preview, but also maybe get a follow-up to you on Pleasant Valley and in the scenic foothills area. So if people are looking at the map here, at the curve of Tudor going north towards Northern Lights, there's kind of to the east of Tudor, where it becomes Muldoon, there's a division there with a number of sort of grid-like streets you can see. And having walked that whole district, and Pete as well, those are probably the worst, I think the worst roads in the district. They're in terrible disrepair, tons of frost heaving. When they were first built, there was no drainage, there was bad drainage and all that kind of stuff. And so we've asked, and I know it's a big scale project, but we've asked to at least get some planning money into this bond and start to move that forward. Could you talk a little bit about, I know there's the state funds that we have, and how much it would cost to just kind of start advancing that ball?
Currently, there's $400,000 that was the state grant that we received a couple of years ago. We kind of just started on it because it's a large, I think it was 15 million, as I recall, somewhere in that neighborhood to do all of the streets in that area. To do the design, as I recall, we estimated about 2 million, so we're short about 1.6 million.
So do we have to do that whole 15 million at once? Can we break it up into stages? How many stages can we break it up into?
Without taking a real in-depth look at it, but yes, it could be broken up into smaller phases. Probably maybe 4 or so, but it all would depend on the drainage, storm drainage, where we would take it, what makes sense. But we think it could be phased.
And if I could follow up on that.
Mr. Middleton, if you don't mind, could I have Mr. Peterson go first? No, actually you did, but he's going to talk about this subject, so Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we talked about this before. Would it be possible to get the engineering or planning done for just one phase? And so say if we got $2 million to plan the whole thing, got 4 segments, so we only need $500,000 to plan the first phase. Could we just maybe put $100,000 on the bond to get that other 100 so we can get the first phase engineered and ready to go? Or
not really.
Okay.
You have to take a look at the entire subdivision, where the drainage is going to go, where you need storm drains. Or we're just simply building a street, probably.
Right.
But there's a lot of things into it. You really have to take a look at the entire picture first.
Right.
And then, based on that, you can see
Well,
what
I mean,
phases
that
make
whole
sense.
area was built on a bog, and so.
Yeah, for whatever reason, the amount of water or soil quality was not anticipated. And the construction method that was allowed and accepted by the Muni 20, 30 years ago, whenever that was, did not succeed. And so
Correct.
at this point, our vision is that we're likely to have to rebuild the entire road system for that subdivision. And, that's a huge capital outlay for a relatively, small area and small.
Well, it's pretty densely populated, though. I mean, there's a lot of people living there.
There are. A road improvement district option would be something that would typically be considered for a project like this, or at least in part. And so, any case, it's a big number, regardless. But it will be at least $1 million to fund the necessary planning work, so that then you would understand what individual construction phases could look like.
We're estimating right now a total of $2 million for the design. They're about 1.6 short.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Hanson.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Middleton.
I was surprised to hear that the named projects here would be for 2017. So are these, are they already designed? When will they go out to bid?
If it's construction money that is being asked for, and that's not necessarily clear on this sheet, we can certainly provide that information there is detail available that describes that.
Oh,
And, yeah, the design or construction status is in the binder.
Okay, so is it typical to do it so in April 7th, 6th, I don't know when the election is, but all of a sudden you know you got money for these things, and then it goes out to bid, and all these companies bid on, they don't have much planning time. It seems like it would be inefficient if you said, okay, let's bid on this.
So
Give them a year to plan their staffing and their equipment and stuff, and we get things cheaper.
typically, what we will do is, if it's a project that has that requires a long construction season, we would actually advertise the project for bid prior to the bond passing, with a caveat to the contractor saying that we would only award the contract if the bond passed. And I don't want to jinx it, but the road bond's been, successful for the last 20 out of 20 years. So it's not a bad bet. And when we've done this in the past, the contractors have been, they have continued to bid on projects even though the funding is not yet guaranteed. That means that we can then bring you a recommendation of award in April or May for a construction start in June. And we typically don't let people start road construction until mid-May anyway, so that's about, it's tight, but we feel strongly that the public is more likely to support these projects if they see immediate impact of their bond decisions. And that's what we are trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Mr. Middleton. Mr. Trainer?
Did you have more?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Mr. Abbott, I see on here Tudor Center, drive diplomacy, drive area resurfacing. What's going on with that? Isn't that owned by university or?
No.
Those in there?
Those are our streets.
Okay, how many residences are in that area, do you know?
I don't.
Who brought this forward?
It would have come from our street maintenance crew, I believe. Typically, the maintenance-related projects on here are generated by our M&O operation.
And that is just design funding there too, just design for the.
Thank you, Mr. Training. Mr. Steele?
So is that who we should complain to when we have road project issues?
To M&O?
Yeah.
Chances are they're already complaining about it themselves. Because they're the ones that are going out and fixing the potholes and working on the storm drain or resurfacing the road.
Just trying to figure out where the power is.
It's a good bet.
Street Gary gets together with street maintenance and gets projects from the community council and all over the place. And you people too, and we go through there and they rank them and try and put together the plan.
All right, you guys do a good job.
Thank you.
Just don't have enough money in that project.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, and I apologize to my colleagues for asking another sort of very distinct or specific question, but by far the largest project we have for us is the Tupid Road upgrade, $6.7 million on this bond. And Pete and I were at the community council last night, and we've talked to many people about it. And that, we do feel that that's pretty crucial. I mean, it's a really dangerous street right now on the west side of Muldoon. Now on the east side, you have another program, I think it's 2 or 3 years in the bond for $8.5 million. And I guess what I'm curious about is sort of how far down the road are we with that $8.5 million? So we already, I know you guys are purchasing up houses, I think, or land in that area, and have we received state funds, or what's the path dependency? I think the $6.7 million we're going forward with that, but that next $8.5 million on a project that I personally don't feel is as crucial, how far down the path are we on that?
We have gotten into some of the design on that. We've purchased some houses on there because the right-of-way is not as good as we need for the improvements. We have a problem with the 10th and M building there, and that we're going to have to spend a lot of money to make that usable to include roads. There's no right-of-way to some of their impacts of their loading and stuff, so we've still got that to do, but we don't have any more further money for that.
So we had state grants for both sides, that initiated the design and right-of-way process on both the east and the west side of Muldoon for Dubin. And with the east side money, we did purchase 4 duplexes. We replatted them so that we could take some of their land for right-of-way, and then we've sold them all. So we don't own those property. Well, one's still,
I think one's.
we haven't closed on the 4th one yet, but it's under contract. So we lost a little bit of money. We knew we would because we took some of their land. They're slightly less valuable, but we bought them, took the land we needed, basically shortened their driveways, and then we resold them, still in their original, and they were rented. Most of them stayed rented during the purchase process.
Great. Well, I'm very glad to hear we haven't knocked any buildings down for it. What is the practical effect of if we went forward with the west side project, we did the 6.7 million, and then we didn't go forward with the east side project? Do we have to repay any money?
No.
Is there any, okay.
No. And we'll still keep moving on the east project. Jerry mentioned the 10th and M building. That building, we might end up buying that whole parcel depending on what the property owner wanted and the rest of that. That would make it very expensive. I'm not even sure the project budget that we've got now contemplates that. So we have a lot of work to do in the meantime to do that. Plus, that road was relatively recently resurfaced. Just resurfaced, though, not redesigned. It's still in its, its current width and still substandard from lighting and pedestrian pathways, etc. But it does not have the same immediate safety issues that the west side does. And so that's why the west side was the priority for the summer of 2017.
Thank you, Matt.
Mr. Dunbar, I just want to say that, your East Anchorage questions are welcome. That's the district you represent. And if you start asking questions about Midtown, Pickett Island, I don't see anybody else. So please continue. Thank you very much.
Thanks, gentlemen. If you do have questions about projects, schedule, dividing, let us know again. As I mentioned earlier, there's no state grants in here. I know that we're matching in our CIP, so I mentioned that before. Thanks, guys. So on our schedule next, we've heard from Mr. Abbott. If you could give me a couple minutes to change slide presentations, I need to pull up the utilities. And we have a separate handout that Rose can pass out. So give me a couple minutes. I'll shut this down and bring it up.
Thank you.
Rose? Yep.
AWU first, and I don't remember the rest of the batting order. Yeah, we're going to be done early tonight.
That is not unwelcome.
I know that's a disappointment to you.
Well, I already started by driving it. Hopefully it hasn't started yet again.
It hasn't, and the temperature is staying below freezing.
Damn.
Stubbornly. That is a little bit of
Yeah,
somewhat
I
unexpected.
turned on the Weather Channel this morning and the projections, the highs were nothing above 30. So it's not going to melt so much at 30.
No, they say it'll be a couple of days before it melts.
4 inches that I got in my place, it's another an inch and a half.
No, it was a real snowfall.
I don't think the school district was planning on canceling school today. They were a little surprised.
Well, I think they lucked out. They had an in-service date already scheduled. Yeah.
Oh, that was fortunate.
I don't think they would have canceled. The roads were not great, but they were not terrible.
I was surprised when I got up and I looked at my phone.
So for the next group of slide deck we have, we're going to start with these are the utilities and enterprises. Again, as I mentioned, everyone will be presenting today except ML&P. We'll hear from them next week. So we're going to start off with AWWU, as soon as I get my presentation squared away for you. We're going to start start off with the water utility. This is a lot of information in here, and for those of you who may not know, Andy Gibson is their controller over at AWU, and Dave Persinger, he is acting for Brett, who's out of town. So if there are questions on operating, I think Linda will be able to handle most of those. And then on the capital, I think Dave has a good handle on those as well. So I think they'll tag team it. We'll start with the water utility, and then we'll go through the wastewater utility. There's a lot of detailed information on here. It's information we shared with you last year. I'm not going to go through each individual table, but maybe Glenn can sort of highlight what's going on with proposed on the 8 summary, any significant changes we might have with the water utility.
Okay. On the water utility, we're not asking for a rate increase in 2017. We are looking at some relatively small increases in operating expense, mostly associated with labor, usage, depreciation, and debt expenses.
So, revenue expenses.
Yeah, we're looking at revenue and expenses because the operating expenses are increasing, but we don't have a rate increase. Net income is going to decrease from 2016 budgeted net income by a slight amount. But we've generally done better than budget on our net income every year. The revenue increases that you see there are pretty much associated with miscellaneous revenues, or we project each year a very small customer growth. Our customer growth rate has been ranging between 0.25% to 0.5% a year. So not a lot there.
Any questions on these before we operating?
I don't see any.
You said there is no rate increase anticipated for this next year?
For the water utility.
For the water utility.
Right. Wastewater's a different story.
Well, that's good news, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Bosky?
Neat things, Glenda, what is, and I'm sure it's just something that I just don't recall, but when you're looking at your cash pools, you have specific projects going, why is your cash pool for 2017 jumping so big? Well, it's not that big, it's just considering the previous years.
Oh, the construction cash pool number? That is the construction cash, and that will basically be debt proceeds. We're anticipating issuing bonds in 2017. Those bonds will be used to repay a short-term city bank loan and fund construction for the next year and a half.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Mr. Weddleton?
A couple things. One, so $7 million, what happens to that?
The net income? We use that to actually help fund capital construction. It goes back in to build equity, and we use the cash to help pay for construction so that we don't have to issue as much debt.
There's been getting some questions on fire hydrants, though. AWU maintains the fire hydrants in charge of the fire department. Is that correct? So you have Potter Valley fire hydrants, Valley fire hydrants, but some of these private water utilities have hydrants. They don't get reimbursed for you have a reimbursement thing, but they want to get reimbursed for having them and maintaining them. They don't.
That would not be AWU that would be doing that. So AWU would only be charging for the hydrants that are in their service territory. I'm not sure if there is a provision for other hydrant systems to be compensated. I am not aware of any right now where we currently pay anybody else for hydrant services. There's a few situations where we have arrangements with people with private water supplies, basically ponds. I don't know that we pay them. I think we may, in some cases, have equipment located or agreements in place. But I'm not aware of any that we pay for, but we can follow up with fire and find out.
I'm aware of some you don't pay for now. They're saying, well, when there's a wildfire, you're going to be tapping into our hydrants and we want some money to maintain it. But so you
Are they inside the fire service area?
Potter Valley must be, and
Some of Potter Valley is.
Or the lower part, Neil Burke's stuff.
Some of that is, and some of it's not. But anyway, it's a good question, and I don't know the answer right now, but it's something we can look at.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I'm on the board of directors of Water District. I know we paid for maintenance on the hydrants. I'm not sure what the arrangement is with fire, if they come and attach to our hydrants, whether or not they pay, they measure what they take out and pay for it. But I will ask them.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. I don't see any other questions.
So Madam Chair, let's go ahead and move into the water utilities operating budget. And then we have a slide on their capital. So similar to other departments, the structure is pretty much the same. And then I'll ask Glenda if she has any highlights she wants to speak with on 16 to 17.
Yeah. The main increases from 16 to 17 are we have some salary adjustments. There's no new positions in the water utility other than about 11% of one position. That's 89% funded sewer and 11% water. It's a treatment plant operator for the Berkwood system. The rest of this, primarily the salary increases, is 2017 pay and benefit increases, and there's been some realignment of labor splits between water and wastewater. Pretty much all of our employees split their time between the two, and we take a guess as to where they're charging and periodically realign that budget. And then use is increasing based on plant additions.
I don't see any questions. Oh, Mr. Wilson.
Well, maybe. Okay, so is this the changes in the existing programs on the salary and benefits adjustments? That's just reallocating between the two?
It's a combination of the pay and benefit increases for 2017 and the reallocation between the two utilities.
So in wastewater, we'll see.
The wastewater, you'll see an increase, but it's a different amount. The wastewater, the increase is a lot smaller because we're actually moving some of the labor charges budget from the wastewater utility to the water utility.
Okay, so everybody rose, but this was
Everybody
more because
rose,
you
and
moved
then
some
we
here.
shuffle it between the two.
Thank you, Mr. Whittleton. I don't see any other questions for Mr. King.
The last slide as it relates to the water utility is their capital program. Again, this is it's a very similar format. The projects are categorized similar to roadway programs, so where they have a whole list of projects that they're looking for in 2017. So if you have any particular questions on any either one of these, capital, operating, design, construction, it doesn't matter, we'll address it later, but this is solely on the water side.
Okay, I don't see any questions.
Okay. Madam Chair, if we could just move to the wastewater utility. Similar format, same 4 slides, just a little bit different. We want to look at their, Glenda can summarize their 8-year summary of their revenues statement, so.
It's similar to the water utility. In the wastewater utility, we are planning to file for up to a 9.5% rate increase in the sewer rates beginning January 1st, 2017. The sewer utility has been lately a bit more of a struggle financially than the water utility. Expenses are rising faster on the sewer treatment side than on the water treatment side. And there's a lot of maintenance that's being done in capital work on the sewer side. So that's primarily what is driving our rate increases. And also the Aspen sewer treatment plant has now become the #1 customer of the water utility. So it has the effect of helping hold down water rate increases, but it does add to the sewer rate increases. And again, we're also planning on issuing bonds in 2017 for the wastewater utility. Again, for the same thing, refund some short-term financing and fund construction for the next couple of years. On this our net income in 2017 from the 2016 proposed budget. In 2016, due to keep rate increases, no rate increases, and growing expenses, we had basically a very minimal net income in our sewer utility fund in the budget. We're trying to increase that back up to a little bit higher level in order to maintain funding to the construction program and keep down the need to issue debt. And the increases are very similar. There are a couple of new, if you want to go to the next slide, and a couple of new items in the sewer utility that are different than water. There's the labor increases. We are requesting addition of one treatment plant operator for Girdwood. This is 11% funded by water, 89% funded by wastewater. This is to help maintain and keep that system running down there, since they're pretty much an isolated system. There is a significant increase in chemical costs. Our chemicals for the treatment plants keep going up and getting more expensive. Utilities as well. And then there is a $300,000 in here that's associated with a large diameter line cleaning program that was included in the budget beginning in 2016. We had added in 2016 4 positions to start doing line cleaning on the big pipes. We have some big pipes that are filling up with junk. This is the operating cost associated with that. We funded the program to begin 4th quarter of 2016.
I don't see any questions.
So the capital side for the wastewater utility, it's pretty difficult to read on the overhead Madam Chair. But
Really?
yeah. Again, there's a copy of it in your book, but if you can highlight some of these.
Yeah, so this is real similar to what you saw on the water utility. You see, the majority of the cost projects are proposed are in the collection system, similar to the distribution system on the water side. Most of those are replacing failing infrastructure that's past life to replace. A little bit of treatment plant improvements and, of course, the IT, various programs for system operation.
And for both utilities, we're assuming that we're not going to get any grants. We continue to apply for grants, and if we get a grant, it's great, it's bonus, it's less debt we have to issue, but we're not counting on it.
Mr. Middleton?
How much will you save if you quit fluoridating the water?
Less than $100,000 a year.
Yeah, the question was
Less than $100,000.
Just tell me that's a testimony, do you want to sit?
Thank you, Mr. Middleton. Mr. Lawson? Okay.
I was just waiting to see if somebody else was going to
Mr.
ask that
Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in connection to the Muldoon overpass, they were moving a water pipe and traffic was diverted for a couple of weeks. Was that project just recently finished over the weekend?
That was recently
Okay. And also there's a project going on Northern Lights in the median. Is that a water pipe or is that a wastewater pipe?
That's a water pipe.
People have been asking me what's going on there, so, and how deep are you putting that?
Generally, they're buried about 10 feet.
About 10 feet?
And that corridor along there is that 2 minutes break, a lot of corrosion, and we're replacing it with a non-metallic pipe.
I noticed that.
That one, you guys approved an not an emergency, but a change order to an existing contract, a very large change order to an existing contract to expedite that water line installation. It's essentially a failed pipe that's being replaced. You remember we had that big water line break right in front of East High last year. This is addressing that challenge.
And so, well, the reason I asked you how deep you're putting it, because somebody told me they didn't think you were putting it deep enough and they were worried it was going to freeze up if it was a water line.
Yeah, we probably won't keep it laid on top of the median there. I can see why people would be concerned about that.
I told him it's probably not finished.
Yeah, we tend to stick it a couple of feet under anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I have a question. So a failed pipe that's being replaced? So did we get our money back for the failed pipe?
I think it was 40, 45 years old. something like
Okay,
that.
so it was a failed pipe? because
It was
they-
supposed to
not
fail.
because it's-
Yeah, it was not a
Okay.
shocker.
Well, that
Right.
works for me then, thank you.
Did you say they were going to do this one?
Okay.
That's
I don't-
correct.
I don't see any other questions. Please continue. You go next one.
Next up is the Board of Anchorage. So we'd like to have Steve and Cheryl join me up there.
You're on the home stretch, folks. Free to go.
How much what is saved for this
Yeah, yeah.
We'll get Madam Chair, starting with way high. Board of Anchorage's 8-year summary, and then the revenues and expenses. I'll ask Cheryl to sort of highlight, or Steve, sort of highlight any significant changes from 16 to 17 proposed by the board.
I'll go ahead and start, jump in if I screw it up. So we're actually forecasting the revenue to be up a little bit, in spite of what you might have read in the papers, for a couple of different reasons. So while the container side of the house is relatively flat, the petroleum side of the house has been carrying the water, and he carried the water in 15, and it's going to pretty much carry the water in 16 as well. Plus, recall 2 years ago when we did the budget of the tariff update, you approved a tariff that had a 4% a year accelerator in it for all of the rates for 5 years. So we're into year 3 of that 5-year rate acceleration. And when you add that to what is going to be forecasted volumes and look at what the fuel traffic is going to look like, we can actually pretty comfortably estimate that we're going to have a little bit of a bump in dock revenue next year. And we're also seeing some decreases in expenses with respect to the litigation. The legal office has asked us to, they've suggested that we budget for about $1 million less for what the outside counsel involvement is going to be in the cases in 2017. And the DIRT team, which has been the administrative help, that the outside help that's been hired to do some of the clerical work for the project, we're reducing that by 4 members. So there'll be a decrease in those expenses as they are related to the litigation. So all in all, we've got all the expenses covered, and we're looking at probably about $1 million that could go to fund balance at the end of the year. Did they get that about right?
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, is that because we anticipated going longer than anticipated, or is it because we got more done than we anticipated?
I don't know exactly. I think it's in the sequence of events. As we get closer to the trial, there's a lot less work with respect to depositions and administrative support for what's going on, and that causes a natural reduction in what those costs are going to be. So I think that's what we're experiencing, and we may be surprised by an even greater reduction if all the defendants settle before we go to court.
I'm worried about the federal government in terms of, they can drag it on forever or decide not to play.
And we probably won't know much more about that until we get done here locally. Marad's been sitting back kind of quiet, watching what's going on.
I was involved in Exxon Valdez, and boy, it was costly
Yeah.
to take that position.
It is always a risk. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Continue.
Steve has done a great job sort of summarizing the first 3 slides. Maybe if there's anything that you have on their operating budget. You mentioned the changes to the receipts and the legal services, where there may be some savings there. Obviously, they have some depreciation and some other minor adjustments, but that's pretty much their operating budget. So if you have any questions, any other questions on their operating budget, on their capital side, I want to point out one item on this one before Steve gets started. On last year, on the port modernization project, we had $223 million in a request to the state grant. Since we put this proposal together, the mayor is interested in probably a revised version to up that amount. So if we do, it'll be around $298 million. So we propose an S version for the utilities, we'll likely see an adjustment in that either as part of the revised budget or after that. So I just wanted to bring that to the Assembly's attention in case you.
Yeah, and Lance is being nice. This was a mistake in my office. When we were building the budget, I neglected to take the 2017 number from last year and adjust it based on the fact that we did not get any money in 2016 as that budget anticipated. So short answer is that number should be 298 instead of 223. That was an administrative mistake on my part. There is no change in our plan. It's the same one we've been talking to you guys about for more than a year. And as you know, we did not get any substantial money from the state or any other funder last year. So the same request from last year is rolling forward.
So I don't see any questions, but I have a question. So the 223, which is going to be 290, whatever, it's the state grant request, right?
That is how we're currently characterizing it. We're working, Mr. Flynn has asked us to work with the legislative committee on the sort of the specifics of how that would be requested in form of grant or debt or certificates of participation or some other form of state support. But in terms of the way the capital budget now reads, with these kind of categories, that's the right one for it to be in.
Right. What I was wondering why it said state fed, because maybe money.
Because that's the only category, that's the way we describe the category. But at this point, right now, our state ask is anticipated to be 298.
Okay.
There may be federal asks as well, but those are somewhat speculative right now.
Thank you. And I just have one other comment in terms of revenue. Considering the fact that general government, the budget is built on a dividend from the port, I'm really glad to hear that your revenues are up. So thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Yeah, I was just a quick question about the operating budget. So you're reducing it, salary and benefits by 88. So you have what, 3/4 of the position you're losing, or one person, or what? How are you building that?
Where are you looking, sir? I'm sorry.
Salary and benefits adjustments, it says 88,176 on the operating.
Yeah, that's that dirt team.
Oh, the dirt team.
That's the dirt team.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Reynolds.
So you said your revenue's up and you expect your revenue to be up in 17?
By
Everything shows here,
about 511,000.
Looking at the first page, it shows 2016 pro forma about 19, 2017.
Well, that includes the first settlement that we received that we didn't budget for in the 16 budget, but up here. So technically,
How much you got?
yeah.
In fact, if we were recalculating it now, the 2016 pro forma would be $7.5 million more than that.
Right.
And that was included 5 million?
Yeah.
5.1.
5.1. There was another 5.5. There was 5.5, and there was a 1.9.
Right, and some of that is reserved, and so it won't necessarily show up as revenue at this time. But we've received about 13 million in settlements to date, 13.5 or something like. Yeah, 13. And but a portion of that is reserved against future liability.
And I probably could have been clearer. I was talking about the dock revenue as opposed to settlement money being put on
That makes sense. Okay, good.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I don't see any other questions.
Are we done? Or did somebody want to walk through the capital? You want me to walk through the projects on the capital slide?
Nope.
Yeah, I'll do that really fast.
Thank you.
Okay, well, the modernization project, I think everybody's up to speed on what that is. That money that we're asking for is what it will take to do phase 2, which is the replacement of the main docks, which will be a 5.5-year project once it's fully funded and we undertake it. It takes that long a little bit because the construction season is what it is, and because we can't tell, Matson and Toad and everybody else to go find someplace else to dock for 5 years. We'll ring you up and ask you to come back when we're done. So we've got to keep the place open while we're doing it. That gymnastics takes a little bit of time and puts a little bit of inefficiency into the construction process. But so that's what that money is for. The GIS mapping. It's another one of those things that, the port is not as mature as some of the other municipal departments are with respect to having its infrastructure captured in GIS formats. That which we do have in it is, no thanks to us, it's what AWU's got down there, it's what MLP has got down there, and it's what they've done for their own utilities. But with respect to the port itself, we're way behind the time with that. And this is our contribution to the municipality's project to get as much into GIS as possible. So in 2017, this investment is going to get us moving into that. And what this also will allow is our tenants who are interested in seeing us get there, because they have some GIS related information on their properties down there, and we're negotiating with them to fold the whole thing into one database so that we can everybody can benefit from seeing what's going on, particularly under the ground out there at the port.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So so you use the GIS mapping for under the water, or?
No, the plumbing systems down there for, the storm drain systems, the petroleum pipes, the buried utilities, where are all of those things? It never fails, we have a tenant down there that's going to put some kind of a line in, and no matter how many times you call utility locates, somebody manages to still hit something. Yeah, so we've got to put a lot of work into making sure that all that is captured. Fortunately, so far everything they've hit has been abandoned stuff, but the day may come. If we can avoid that, we certainly can.
Okay, great, thank you.
The Ship Creek boat launch repairs. Recall, this has nothing to do with the maintenance dredging that goes on down at the boat launch. There's two fingers. There's a north finger and a south finger, in between which is the boat launch. The north finger is suffering incredibly from erosion to the point where it's getting to be borderline unsafe to even be able to get out there. What we've been able to do is through the state has a harbor maintenance grant program, and while the port itself doesn't qualify to be eligible for any of those funds, the boat launch does, because the boat launch is a harbor related process. So we applied for a grant last year, and we're fortunate enough to get $689,000 out of that to match our contribution, so that we can do that construction work this summer.
Thank you. Mr. Teal has a question.
Which is a jetty, an armored jetty of some sort?
Yeah, really, there was quite a bit of armor rock there that, for whatever reason, Mother Nature has torn away. It's a lot of the rock is still out there. It's just not where it needs to be. But there's.
So it's just a maintenance issue.
Yeah. It's to re-armor the north face of that north finger, which is right up against Ship Creek.
Is any of the security measures that we're taking down there included in that, or is that?
No, that's all being done separate. Yeah, and that's all being done with a port security grant that we received in 2015 that will do the installation of late this winter, early spring.
In terms of GIS, it's great if you've got a facility that doesn't move to have GIS. You get it one time and you're set. But I suspect you constantly have shifting and movement within reason along some of that waterfront area.
And we're going to have a whole new dock system that goes in, if we're lucky. So then we'll have to be smart about what it is we put in there, in what sequence.
So you're just trying to find what you have so that you don't screw up when you do the modernization.
Well, yes, and for any land side regular maintenance that has to happen. And we're not the only ones that do maintenance down there. The tenants do maintenance on their own property as well. And it's important for them to be able to see where utilities are and where pipelines are and those kinds of, so that they're not inadvertently causing us a problem. By doing their own
Railroad,
maintenance.
does the military do any construction down there?
No.
Just that access?
No, the only thing the military has that crosses diagonal across the port is a pipeline. and they know exactly where it is, and we know exactly where that one is. It's not mapped in GIS, but we sure know where it is. And where we would get in any trouble with it, and we'd have to try real hard at this point, is once we get off the pavement and out into the new north extension area, there's going to have to be some work there to make sure that that gets avoided when we start improving that area out there.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
And the storm drain repairs, I mean, that's another chronic perennial problem that we have down there. Not a year goes by where there isn't a problem with the storm drain. They're as old as some of Able's water pipes. And we'll have a collapse every year, or we'll get into the drains in the springtime and find them under the manholes, and we'll find them filled with dirt, and they've got to get cleaned out and relined. So that's a good place to be in the budget world for that kind of work. You know, we figure it's at least 1 year. And you all know about the wharf pile enhancements. We budget $3 million a year for that. And if we're lucky, the bids come in lower, and we don't have to spend that much. We're in that position this year. I think it came in, what, 1.6? 1.7 is what it came in at this year. And that's a nice thing. When we started out with this, we were getting our clocks cleaned on the cost every year. But now there's about 3 or 4 different companies that have been down to the port and have done it. So they're a little more competitive than they were when we started this. So the price is getting a little more manageable.
So are you going to do twice the work, or are you going?
We're still only going to do
last
100.
2 years?
Yeah, I mean 100 is a good number because of the amount of season that it would take me to do 200. Holy cow!
Yeah.
That would be a lot of people running around down here. In fact, this year they're running against the weather now. They asked for a couple of weeks extension to get done what they needed to get done. $298 million from the state makes that go away. So that's something else that we're kind of looking forward to. If we know we're going to replace the docks in their entirety, then we can back off on what it is we're doing to fix the one we have. And that gives us a little bit more flexibility in the budget going forward. So move us on down here in Juneau this year.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Cheryl.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to solid waste. Similar to the water utility, we have 2 separate efforts. The first, we're going to start with disposal, and then we'll talk about refuse. Mark, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Yeah, you have to forgive me, we don't have our CFO here with us today, so we're going to have to go through it.
All right, so I think if this information is being provided in your books as well, and I don't know if you guys want to take a rundown on the 6 and 8 year summary, or maybe just on your revenues and expenses on either one of these modules. Any highlights that you'd like to point out for yourself?
I mean, good news is there's no rate changes proposed for 2017. There's no staffing changes that are proposed. Revenues are remaining constant or consistent across the disposal utility, so there's no rate increase. We're not expecting any increase or different tonnage or anything like that, so the revenues are steady. A big thing is we recalculated the landfill closure accrual, and that was based on changes in density. Basically, density increased, which that allows you to fill more garbage into the landfill itself. And that allowed us to reduce that annual landfill closure accrual amount that you see there. Most of the other stuff is outside of our control for personnel changes and labor costs, stuff like that. You will notice that there's a $1.1 million, or approximately $1.1 million dividend distribution.
We're looking at slide 23. Sorry, Mark.
That's okay. Go for it. I was just trying to find that.
So similarly, on their proposed 17, any salary adjustments related to the contract, we've included those. Some work that they want to do for some strategic planning, and then some other work that they want to do inside the landfill. And as Mark mentioned, it's pretty much business as usual at the landfill, with the exception of the increase in the dividend to support the budget.
and then some adjustments in the closure rule that the assembly in the past has been interested. So that's sort of the highlights of their operating. On their capital, they do have sort of a lot of small different improvements, mostly equipment that they're proposing. So if there's any particular questions or comments on either one of any of these projects here, you can address them now or look at them later. Do I think, as I mentioned early on, one of their significant improvements is at the central transfer station. Of course, some improvements out there. That's pretty much it.
Mr. Busby, can you go back and just explain to me the dividend distribution of 1.1? Did we have one that large last year?
We did not. This is the first year that the disposal utility is proposed for a dividend. In the past, the collection utility, which we'll talk about in a minute, they have paid dividends in different years at different times at different amounts. But this is the first year that a dividend is being recommended for the disposal utility.
Anything else, Mr. Rosky?
Thank you.
Okay, well, let me go to Mr. Steele and then I'll come back to you.
So, so you're saying no changes in essence in terms of requests for additional funding. So are you doing just such a great job of management, or you found something that nobody knew was there? Or?
It's not, I wouldn't say it's me in any way, shape, form, or manner. You know, I've only been there.
By you, I mean.
It's due to people like Jim Brown and who's sitting next to me and back here, customer service manager. So. And the business is pretty steady. I mean, we just don't, it's a little bit of a time of transition right now where, that's part of the strategic planning and the master planning effort that we're going to go through next year is to start to try to develop, what those long-term plans for facility improvements,
Closure and life expectancy.
that type of stuff, and also what are the different programs that we're going to concentrate on next year, and how are we going to, improve recycling, or how are we going to, improve the reliability of our equipment? Are we going to look at changing the types of vehicles that we have, and moving toward, fuel efficient, energy efficient facilities, stuff like that.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Dunbar?
This might be more a question for Mike and the utility itself, but when there's a very large building, say a derelict building, and it's demolished, do we ever offer discounts? Does the city help pay for that? I mean, is that ever
We
used
do
as
not.
a tool?
At the Northern Lights Inn, there has been discussion about the city waiving or subsidizing a portion of the disposal fees for that material. But the utility does not provide that subsidy. That would be something that if that were ever desired, we would recommend that would have to be funded, for want of a better term. Just like with the water utility or the electric utility, city government has to pay its share of those costs. And when solid waste comes and picks up our dumpster, we have a compactor, so it isn't solid waste that picks it up, but when our waste is collected, we pay the going rate.
Can we, if it was solid waste in a project like that, could we say, hey, take it out of next year's dividends?
Yep. It would be that would be a city decision, not a utility decision.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Whittleton?
So, again, talking about this dividend, so RCA said MLMP couldn't give us a dividend last year, maybe this year. Is there any possibility that they did this and go hang on to it?
The solid waste department is not economically regulated. So the regulatory commission does not, there's no oversight from them of either the collections or the disposal business.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Whittleton. Mr. Steele and Mr. Green?
Along those same lines, however, what extraordinary measures have to take place in terms of hazardous material? Does it have to be segregated and lined differently or somehow contained differently for the landfill?
By what are you referring to?
Well, I'm saying asbestos,
Asbestos?
you know.
We have 2 lined ACM cells. They're a construction demo where ACM is handled, and it's entombed there. And once it's put in place, it's buried, and it's never disturbed again, and it's all lined.
No groundwater intrusion or anything?
No. And we monitor to make sure there isn't any. We have ground monitoring wells all around the facility.
And I'm sure it costs more to do that, too.
Yes.
So, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Strange?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're discussing Northern Lights Inn. It's laced with asbestos. So they're gonna have to figure out when the building can be taken down. You've gotta put water on it, so the asbestos get a fly. And then it's gotta go to a sealed, disposals have to be dropped off into it. It's gonna be an expensive operation.
I'm not sure how you separate. I mean, that's the, you know, when you
Well,
miss
that's
some.
the material, once it comes in, will go into what would be our 8B construction demo cell, and that's all that goes in there. The entire route in would have to be watered constantly. The dumping area would have to be watered constantly and maintained until we can get the material covered, which would be that would either have to be done by the contractor as part of their deal, or it would be an incurred cost to us by having our water truck constantly doing that and our personnel doing that.
Extraordinary measures in terms of demolition, and I'm not sure how you separate, how you get an insulation material.
They'd have to
that's
do
loose.
that first.
How-
Right, and that's typically, that'll be a project expense, a demo expense. There's some material we cannot accept, and we simply don't, but, you know, if there's an appropriate certification in terms of what's in the waste, we do have some capability for asbestos-contained materials in the landfill of certain levels and certain concentrations, and, right, and we're very careful about that, and we obviously don't want to violate our permits or the rest of it, but we do want to be of service to the construction community, not just for the Northern Lights Inn, but for the rest of the construction industry in Anchorage.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was wondering, you know, we're talking about fortunately getting a dividend this year. Is that possibly because we increased tipping fees, or have they been increased lately, or?
I don't think tipping fees have been increased in 8-10 years. Maybe not quite that long.
I think it's less than that.
6
I think there was about a 5 or 6% increase 4 or 5 years ago, and then there was a larger increase about 5 years before that. So, but we're not anticipating a tipping fee increase for at least the next 2 years. Beyond that, there might be a need, but that'll depend on cost structure. At this point, we're not proposing that today.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Abbott. Mr. Peterson, Mr. Nosky?
Thank you. So when we're talking about the closure liability for the landfill, where are we sitting in relation to our liability versus how much?
So it's a sort of a dynamic process. Not every year, but periodically we go out and we measure how much room the landfill still has how much trash it can handle going forward. We have consistently underestimated that from the beginning of the landfill's useful life. So pretty much every time we go and look, the landfill is able to handle more trash than what we thought before. It's basically compacting faster than we expected it to, or more than we expected it to. So the initial estimates for how much money we needed to collect so that the closure program would be fully funded when the landfill was done was much higher 5 or 10 or 20 years ago than it is now. So we've seen consistent reductions in the annual contribution rate. So the short answer to your question is, we are on track with the contribution rate that is budgeted here and that is budgeted in the long-range plan to be fully funded on the day the landfill closes. But if the landfill closed today, it would not be fully funded. And that's never been our objective.
Right, hopefully we have 50 more years to go.
We're thinking 35 plus at this point. Originally the landfill thought, a 30 to 40 year useful life. That was almost 30 years. Well, when did the landfill open, Jim?
87.
87. So 30 years ago. 30 to 50 years was the working estimate at that time. We still think there is 30 to 40 years left now. So the work that's been done out there, the improvements in the technology and the way the landfill's being run. I brag on the landfill all the time, and I deserve no credit for it personally. But back in the 80s, whoever was, there's a guy named Joe Grunwald that was particularly impactful on that. But the assemblies and the mayors in the late 70s and 80s will never get enough credit for developing a site as close to Anchorage as it is, but still isolated from population and other impacts with the kind of useful life that this facility has. We are the envy of virtually all of our peers out there in not having a looming landfill problem ahead of them. And we still have the possibility of expanding the landfill in place with the Department of Defense. There is a tentative commitment that will be allowed to extend the landfill in place, for the second half of this century. But thankfully, that's not an immediate need.
Next landfill you can have in South Anchorage. Lance, can you give us a specific breakdown of projections with the current existing balances and the closure accounts for the landfill? That'd be helpful. The other question, I'm sure we're not going to be able to discuss here in open forum, but it would be helpful anytime we're talking about the landfill. We obviously need to be prepared for and have a plan of attack for the pending litigation.
Good point.
So
and we're prepared to brief the assembly on that at your convenience.
I think that's a big issue, and I think it's something that we probably need to discuss before we actually take action on the budget, because it may impact some of our decisions on the budget, especially this 1.142 dividend is going back into general government, right?
Correct.
So we might consider litigation that's pending, and if maybe it needs to go somewhere else. So
Thank you, Ms. Wadowski. We will have an executive session soon on this issue. And Mr. Trainee and Mr. Peterson.
Good, Chair. Double loaders, for lack of a better word. Other waste management come into our area and pick them up and haul them out, because we don't have the capability of moving them. You guys were talking about one time about buying more equipment. Are we still pursuing that?
Can you
Double loaders, you mean?
Recycle.
No, we're talking about the compactors downtown.
We're talking about the big vans you just pull up to.
Yeah, the roll-on, roll-off stuff.
Yeah, roll-offs, roll-ons. Sorry.
We're still looking into that. I'm not sure.
Hey, I can start in, Mark. You go ahead and finish.
If you would like, because you've been around for all along.
Yeah, I tasked, when I came back, I tasked the leadership of the department to investigate whether the solid waste department should take over that business that we have allowed others to do in our service area because we didn't have the capability. Our preliminary finding is that that would not be a good business venture for solid waste services at this time. That's not completed yet. Mark and his folks are still looking at a couple of other issues that need to bear on that. But for the time being, I'm not planning that will be a service that we will take on. If the analysis changes and it's good for the business, and more importantly, it's good for the customers, then we would consider it. But at this point, it looks like it's not particularly lucrative. We would have to spend a lot of money to be in a position to do the work. And it would take a long time for us to pay ourselves back through this business line. And it would be very disruptive to the operations that are currently providing, the private sector operations that are currently providing this right now. So, for those reasons, our initial review is that that is not a good business choice for solid waste services.
We figured out the amount of cost for the other companies to come in and do what they do, and the amount of profit they make, and if it works for the city.
We're not
it's not gonna be $1
evaluating
million.
their business model, we're evaluating what our business model would look like. I don't know how much money they make and what their cost structure is, and we don't have a good way to know that, nor really should we. But we can evaluate what our own cost structure would be, what equipment we need to buy, what personnel we would need to operate it, how much it would cost us to buy the stuff, if we had to borrow the money, how much that would cost, et cetera. It's basically a business plan that we're developing, and right now, it does not pencil. That's our preliminary evaluation.
Well, Mike, do we get any money for them coming into our area, because we're a monopoly, and they come in to our monopolized area and haul trash out? Do we get any money for them doing that?
No.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
Madam
Trainer.
Chair.
You're welcome. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is back to a little bit something that Amy brought up a couple minutes ago, and it's dealing with landfill methane gas sales. I see we're projecting about $250,000 less. And are we charging less for methane, or it's not producing as well as we expected, or what's going on with that?
It's, the utilization isn't the same, so it's actually decreasing.
So we're not producing as much methane?
No.
on the basis-
There's plenty of landfill gas there. It's the customer, it's Fort Rich on the other end.
They're not buying as much as they did previously?
That's what we're looking at, yeah.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Steele.
But we're just burning it off and waste to them. I mean, there's a.
Well, there's
Yeah.
pretty much a portion of it is, during the summer, a portion of it is burned off of what we're actually collecting out the landfill. But it's, the reverse of that during the winter. Lights are needed to be on a little bit more out of Fort Ridge.
It'd be interesting to know what their logic is in terms of not wanting us to tap that resource.
I'm sorry, you have to.
No, I mean, that's something that's kind of outside of our control, and
Yeah.
hopefully we can figure that out.
Thank you, Mr. Trill. Mr. Steele, Mr. Trainer.
Rather than waste electricity, can that electricity be added back into the grid? Or can we not do that? We just flare off the gas?
I think that was explored during the development of the project itself.
We don't make the electricity. Doyon does.
I know.
And so Doyon could conceivably make extra electricity and sell it into the grid. They're interconnected. So they could do that if they wanted. For whatever reason, they do not. So, it's a little bit of a challenge for us to figure out how to gain maximum value from the gas. The good news is we have a customer that is incented to buy electricity from us and is willing to pay a little bit of a premium for it, and is located in such a way that it's very efficient for them to take the gas and to convert it and then to sell it to their customer. The bad news is we only have one of those customers, and we don't have currently an alternative market for our gas. And if Doyon doesn't, Doyon Utilities is the firm that we contract with. If they continue to not take gas at the volumes that we could create it, then we may need to look for an alternative or an additional customer.
And that's one of the programs that I want to explore, or we want to explore with the master planning effort next year. It's like, what can we do with that additional gas, given the fact that the production of electricity with it is kind of out of our control. So can we make compressed natural gas out of it? Does it make sense for us to use it as an alternative fuel source in our vehicles, selling it? It's a new area in solid waste management, so it's going to be, I'm definitely going to be really interested in taking a look at what options are available and what may or may not pencil out for us in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Steele.
How does Plant 2A work playing in the mix in terms of that?
At this point, it does not. One of the benefits of having Doyon as our customer is that we don't have to treat the gas before we give it to them. Their generation equipment takes the gas in its current form. If we were going to plug this into the NSTAR pipeline, our gas, we would have to spend a lot of money to condition it. Our gas is not at utility grade, and it would take quite a bit of expense to get it to that point, which is why the fact that Doyon has virtually on-site generation capability that is tuned specifically to burn our gas, which is not quite as good as what you would get out of an NSTAR pipe. We don't want to spend that money to condition it to meet that NSTAR, and it's not their fault. It's a typical utility grade standard. So that's why burning the landfill gas at the landfill gives us the most value for our product. But what we might do ultimately is build our own genset.
Yeah, and
That is
transport it directly to that.
Either use it on site, use the electricity to offset our own expense, and or sell it into the grid. It doesn't make sense to convert the gas to better gas. It makes more sense to convert the gas to electricity. So that's one of the things that Mark and his folks will be examining in 2017, because we do have this. If Doyon can't commit to buying more of our gas, we're going to have to do something different.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Steele. Mr. Training.
Trev, as you're exploring that, figure out how many generation units we can run on the gas. Because a year ago, we were talking about adding another generation plant because the sheer volume of gas we had coming up. And that's not going to slow down. It's a great plant. You guys did a great job of that. I just want to capture all the, rather than flare it off. So we'll look forward to that.
It's my understanding that they don't have the space in the Doyon facility. They would have to add space.
We have to add other space to the over generation.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Please
Get on the grid.
Okay, Madam Chair, we move on to the second half of the solid waste business, which is refuse. Some markers here to sort of highlight the things they want to point out, and in your summary or presentation statements, which are operating.
And again, it's like I said when we started the conversation. Sorry, I plowed through the slides. Basically, we're not anticipating expanding our collection area. We're not anticipating taking on any additional services. So pretty much revenues are remaining stable. We're not taking on any more positions in 2017. We're anticipating, again, collecting the same amount of waste. We're not anticipating waste collection to go up or down, and there's just not that much change in it. Were there any questions on that page, or?
I don't see any questions.
Okay. And so again, the adjustments for the operating revenue, again, are related to personnel, a little bit additional in travel that's related to training mostly for our staff. And then of course, there's a $570,000 dividend this year that's being provided by the collections utility.
So on this slide here,
No, I'm done.
Okay, and then on the capital side, similar to the collections, they have a pretty small capital program, mostly as it relates to equipment or the facilities that they currently own. Again, we're looking at what's going on to complement their central transfer station.
It's basically replacing trucks, replacing dumpsters, lids for dumpsters, residential cards. We've also got a little bit in there for energy efficiency improvements, and the administrative portion of the central transfer station, the admin buildings. And also helping out to replace the heating system. Right when I started there this year, it was really great timing, but the air conditioning on the building went out. So it was a pleasant summer, needless to say, especially in my office. So it's good stuff. But gonna try to start getting ahead of some of that stuff with the energy efficiency improvements, taking a better look at.
For future reference, if you have to have your air conditioning go out and rely on opening your windows, don't have an office next to the central transfer station.
Every once in a while, you get a good whiff of rotting fish.
Yeah,
So,
of anchorage. Yeah.
You can't say anything to Jim. He's smelled the worst of it, but yeah.
Thank you.
So-
Mr. Whittleton?
It's a bigger issue than it might look like.
A couple things. One, so your IGCs go up too. Is that SAP related, like the? Or I was just looking at 24 IGCs, general government, government page. Some of the pages.
Through the chair. I'll have to get this, I can provide you with the measurements.
But are you guys? You have to link to SAP too, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And then this is a little bit, I just see this line for lids on your capital. We've had a couple places, marijuana facilities, that they said, okay, well, they're gonna have secure trash, they're gonna use metal lids on their dumpsters, and I haven't seen a metal lid. Do you have metal for marijuana tamper-proof lid? Or when will you be getting?
Do you want to take that one, Jim?
At this point in time, no, we don't. We have our standard lids. We also have locking lids, but they're more of a poly lid with a lock that's mounted on the dumpster itself that rolls over the lid and locks.
Just cut it off.
Is that,
It's on a plastic container, can't you just cut the top of the container off?
These are dumpsters.
these are dumpsters
Yeah.
that they're dealing with. Not
So-
not the regular roll cart, but we're talking about.
Okay,
the
so they're just regular metal dumpsters.
Metal dumpsters with the poly lids on them.
So how would we do it? If somebody needed a different kind of a dumpster, would they provide that themselves? And then we would, as long as it conformed to our standards, we would just service it?
At this point in time, I would probably do the recommendation I'd make.
Yeah.
Because it's such a limited quantity. And I think as, just my own belief on this, is somebody's running an operation like that, they're not gonna throw anything in there that's worth stealing.
Thieves don't know that.
Yeah.
I
Doesn't mean
I
people won't
understand,
try.
but.
Been there the second time.
But by the time, and I can understand wanting to have a locking lid and, something to look into and fall in the future, but we do have lids that are locking. They're just not metal.
Right. No, I understand the standard thing, but might expect a question.
Sure.
From someone.
Definitely.
Good idea. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Whittleton. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you. I just happened to think of one last thing about the operating budget. You've still got a code enforcement officer that's just assigned over there,
Yes. Yep.
and she's still keeping pretty busy.
Oh yeah. Yes.
I'm afraid to do it. All right, thank you.
Well, watch what you say, she's sitting right over there. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you have nothing else for Mark and Jim, we'll ask.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. We'll ask
Thank you, guys, good job.
Pat and Paul to come on up. And we'll do our last department for the day, which is Merrill Field.
Such a problem.
How was your tour yesterday?
Pick it up.
Excellent. Okay, Madam Chair, well, we have Director for Merrill Field and his business analyst with us here. So we'll go ahead and, similar to the last few utilities, we'll ask them to sort of highlight anything that they want to point out in their 8-year summary and in their revenues and statements, and then we'll kind of summarize their changes in or any adjustments in operating with the capital. So, Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Operating revenues is about 1.7, expenses are 1.4, all split.
Why are they off?
I'm sorry?
Why are they off?
Off what?
You said the revenues are off.
Oh, no, I said the revenues are about 1.7 and our expenses are about 1.4. Sounds good.
See what happens when you start.
I know. Chest.
Anything else, Mrs. Steele?
No, I wouldn't dare.
please continue.
That's it.
That's it, okay.
So maybe we just, Paul, if you have anything on the operating budget that you want to highlight, I want to give you the full benefit of sitting back there for joining us. So
Good job.
again, other departments, they make some adjustments to their salaries, a little bit of appreciation. They had some one-time money for a master plan study. They are asking for a little bit of increases in supplies and services, but nothing really significant based on their operating. And then on their capital, they do receive a lot of federal grants from FAA, and they do, obviously, and I think I mentioned the taxiway Quebec in April, phase 6, when we talked as one of their major projects. So if you have any questions on their operating or their capital, give you an opportunity to weigh in.
I don't see any.
Okay?
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, there's still a lot of work to do over there in terms of compaction and with, especially with that stuff on that side of the airfield that we traveled through, where you can see the undulation and stuff. And so that project is funded to continue a little bit as time goes on to open up more space for us.
Yes, basically about 42% of the 437 acres on Merrill Field are on former municipal land that was open from 1930 to 87. That was anywhere from 6 or 7 feet to 45 feet of trash, depending on where you are on the field. That hillside, if you will, that parallels 15th Street is 45 feet of trash. Further south you go from Merrifield Drive, the east-west version of Merrifield Drive, the deeper the trash is. That dynamic compaction project that we currently have, about 9/10 done, is phase 4. Next will be phase 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. It will just be a continuum until we get the areas that are currently paved all dynamically compacted. The current project's about an $8 million bill. That's doing 7.75 acres. That's pretty spendy, but if the alternative is to take all that underlying trash out, haul it to the landfill, then bring infill, that $8 million would probably be closer to 40 million. So, as expensive as it is, it's a least expensive way to recapture the good use of that land. And that undulation which you found on Merrifield Drive, both directions coming in, are naturally occurring speed bumps because of the differential settling of the underlying crash bed. Eventually, both those roads will need reconstruction, probably 3 or 4 years.
If I may follow on, so you're paying for that out of your budget, or is the municipality paying for that, generally speaking? Or is solid waste service paying?
There are no muni funds that go into operation or capital projects on the airport. The carryover, if you will, that we have year to year is what we pay for our sponsor share on it. For those dynamic compaction projects, 95% of that is through the federal airport improvement program that's allocated to airports around the country. We nominally get $1 million a year. This year, we have $8.2 million alone.
If we have a failure of the landfill, if you will, as we had in the past, who pays for that?
You're referring to where the hillside slumped off on the 15th a couple of years ago, coincidentally in February, least attractive time to do it. That, in large part, was compliments of a trench that came up over an ML&P trench that didn't have the right fill that went back into it, allowed water penetration into the subterranean mass. That issue's been resolved. Eventually, that hillside and the drainage on top of the hill is going to have to be addressed. We hope to address that next year, and probably that'll be a combination of solid waste services, streets, and Merrifield funding to address it. Cost is to be determined, but probably in the more rough order of magnitude, $100,000.
Thank you very much for the tour. Good, very good tour. Thank
Mr.
you.
Peterson and then Mr. Rose.
I was just going to, thanks, Madam Chair. You talked a little bit to us, and we were taking a tour yesterday about your plans for upgrading security. I wonder if you could discuss that a little bit for those who didn't have to be on the tour yesterday.
Merrifield has a series of cameras on field that surveil different areas, and they are all, at this point, federally funded through various FAA-administered AIP, Airport Improvement Program funding. There are several areas on field where we do not have camera coverage. We are going to eat that elephant one bite at a time. Our next project will be about $1 million for the Oracle Street west side of the field. That will wrap down around to the whiskey area where the gravel strip is. That will run somewhere between $1 million to $1.5 million. And if we don't complete the camera installs, then next year would be another such project. We also have guardian security doing patrols after hours. That's working out pretty well. And what we have done from a protocol point of view, since we had our June 2nd vandalism issue where 87 aircraft had punctured tires, we used to have all of the camera pictures up on our website at the request of the pilots so they could see what was going on weather-wise on field. What we are doing with the new camera installs is modifying that so that we have very few cameras shown on the website, but for the individual pilots or businesses who have a need or a desire to see where their airplane is or their apron is, they'll have access with passcode to accommodate that. But the general public will not see that or have access to it. APD, by the way, will have full access to everything.
All right, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Rose?
I've seen here you have municipal aviation fuel fees and state of Alaska fuel fees. And I guess what are those and why are they going up?
The state collects fuel flow fees. We do not do that. And then we get an apportionment based on the number of aircraft we have. And the state, as you no doubt are aware, is increasing their cost to aviation in the state, including fuel taxes.
So that's your piece of the...
Yes, that's our piece of the
This, your total expenses basically are unchanged from last year.
This is pretty much as good as fuel budget.
It seems impressive, because there's a lot more going on. That's four, you have those new hangars going up, but those don't increase your costs at all, you get more revenue and more costs.
Technically, we don't. We lease the raw land, and the individuals build whatever they're going to build on there. That's all coordinated, but we don't get any piece of that pie, so to speak. The improvements are all taxed by the municipality for property taxes. There's about $430,000 a year right now that the muni gets to property taxes for improvements on Merrill Field, but it doesn't impact our operating costs, and nor do we get any additional revenue from raw land versus development.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I don't see any other questions.
Madam Chair, we don't have any more questions for you today. We're going to start next Friday with the continuation of this. We're going to start off with finishing the utilities enterprise. We'll start with ML&P, and then we'll do ACDA, and then we're going to go into Mr. Schuette's group of economic community development, and we'll conclude with the rest of general government with the CFO and all of the rest of the departments. And we should be done before 2. We start at 10. I really appreciate your attention. If you do have any more questions, please send them to myself and we'll respond. Send them to Rose. We do have a list today. So thanks again for your attention. I really appreciate it.
Right, and just one comment, because we're scheduled for 4 hours again next week, so if you want to work with the clerk to maybe change that?
I'll do that.
Yeah, that would be really great. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.